Hey guys, tonight we slip backward, way backward, into a time before cities, before writing, before anyone knew what a hangover was, and you probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous right now, but because the humans you're about to inhabit didn't have the luxury of learning things safely. They learned by accident, by risk, and sometimes by waking up on the ground wondering why the world felt softer and louder at the same time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, I'm curious, what city are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not a farmer yet. You don't plant rows. You don't store grain in neat bins. You move when the food moves. You follow seasons, herds, fruiting cycles. Your life is built on attention, watching the land closely enough to notice when something is edible, dangerous, or just different. And one day, something is very different. It starts quietly. A cluster of berries left too long in a skin pouch. A hollow in a tree where rainwater mixes with fallen fruit. Honey stolen from a hive and forgotten for a few days because something else demanded your focus. Maybe weather, maybe predators, maybe another human bleeding nearby. Time passes, invisible work happens. Yeast, which you don't know exists, starts eating sugar and breathing out alcohol. When you come back to it, the smell is strange but not rotten, sharp, sweet, alive. You taste it because tasting is how you survive, and then the world tilts. This is not the first time humans encounter fermentation as a chemical process. Historically, we know fermentation predates agriculture by thousands of years. That's a fact archaeologists are comfortable with now, based on residue found in Paleolithic stone tools and containers that show chemical markers of fermented substances. But for you, right now, it's just a feeling. Warmth spreading in your chest, muscles loosening, fear dimming slightly at the edges, laughter coming easier, even though nothing funny happened. You have just gotten drunk and you have no word for it. The quirky part, you're almost certainly not alone in this experience on Earth. Other animals get intoxicated too. Modern primates still eat overripe fruit and show clear signs of drunkenness, stumbling, vocalizing more, making poor decisions. So one fringe but increasingly discussed idea is that your ancestors recognized intoxication first by watching animals behave strangely after eating certain foods. In other words, you may have learned how to get drunk by watching a monkey have a really bad afternoon. But here's where scholars still argue quietly and endlessly. Did you seek this out? Or did it just keep happening to you until you accepted it? One camp says early humans intentionally returned to fermented sources because the effects were memorable and socially bonding. Another argues intoxication was tolerated but not pursued, that survival always came first, and altered states were a side effect, not a goal. Sitting here in your borrowed body, it's hard to tell. You didn't plan this, but now that you feel it, you don't hate it either. Your world softens. The firelight flickers differently. Shadows feel playful instead of threatening. Someone nearby starts making sounds that might be music, or might just be noise, but it feels important. This is another key historical point. Alcohol lowers social barriers, and even at this early stage it likely helped humans tolerate closeness, eye contact, and shared vulnerability. You are a social species under constant stress. Anything that turns fear down, even briefly, is powerful, and yet there's danger here too. You don't know your limits. No one does. Someone drinks too much and vomits violently, losing precious water. Someone else stumbles into the dark and doesn't come back. The lesson is learned without explanation. This thing is not just food. It has rules. Fire has already taught you that. So has meat left too long in the sun. Now fermentation joins the list of invisible forces that can help or kill you depending on respect. That understanding, that the world contains hidden processes you can harness, is a quiet cognitive leap. Some researchers argue that recognizing fermentation helped train the human brain to think in delayed cause and effect. You did something days ago, and now something happened. That's not obvious when your life is mostly immediate hunger and threat. You don't write this down. You don't teach it formally, but you remember, and memory is enough. The night passes in fragments. Sleep comes heavy. Dreams are strange, more vivid than usual, filled with colours and faces that blur into animals and fire. There's a modern debate about whether early intoxication influenced dream symbolism and eventually myth-making. It's speculative, but tempting. Altered states introducing the idea that reality has layers. When morning comes, your head hurts, your mouth is dry, you feel slower. This is the price. But you also remember the warmth, the laughter, the way fear loosened its grip. And when you move on from this place, you carry that memory with you. Fermentation doesn't require farming. It requires patience, accident, and curiosity. You have all three. Long before you settle down, long before you domesticate wheat or barley, you have already discovered that the world can change your mind if you let it sit long enough. And somewhere deep in your nervous system, a connection has formed. Sugar, time, transformation, relief. It will not be the last time you chase that feeling. You start noticing sweetness differently now. Before, sweet meant calories, fast energy before the next long walk or hunt. Now, sweet also carries a memory. It's not conscious in the modern sense, not a thought you can articulate, but your body remembers what sweetness plus time can become. So when you find fruit fallen and softened on the ground, skins split, buzzing faintly with insects, you hesitate for half a breath longer than you used to. Rotting used to mean danger, disease, death. But this is a different kind of rot. The smell isn't foul, it's sharp, almost inviting. You taste it carefully, then more confidently. Honey, too, becomes suspiciously interesting. Honey doesn't spoil easily, but when it mixes with water, rain trapped in a hollow log, moisture seeping into a cracked pot, it can ferment all on its own. This is one of those quiet historical facts that feels almost unfair in its simplicity. Mead, one of humanity's oldest alcoholic drinks, requires no farming, no fire, no tools beyond a container and time. Archaeological evidence from sites in Africa, Asia and Europe suggests fermented honey drinks may be tens of thousands of years old. You don't know you're making mead. You don't know the word. You just know that sometimes the honey water makes your limbs feel heavy and your thoughts feel slippery. The effect isn't always pleasant. Sometimes it's dizzying, nauseating, disorienting. But sometimes, especially in small amounts, it's gentle. A warmth behind the eyes, a softening of the constant edge of vigilance. You laugh more easily, you feel closer to the people around you, even the ones you don't fully trust. This matters, because trust is expensive in your world. It costs attention, it costs safety. Here's a quirky detail. Modern researchers love pointing out, fermented fruit often has a slightly higher caloric payoff than unfermented fruit, because yeast partially breaks down sugars, making them easier to digest. One fringe hypothesis suggests early humans may have been subconsciously drawn to fermented foods, not just for intoxication, but because they extracted calories more efficiently. In other words, your first buzz might have been nutritionally rewarding before it was psychologically interesting. But intention is still the big question. Scholars argue about this endlessly. Did you actively prefer fermented foods, seeking them out because of how they made you feel? Or did you just tolerate them because they were still edible when fresh food was scarce? Some say intoxication was a byproduct of desperation. Eat the fruit or starve. Others argue that once you noticed the effects, you adjusted your behaviour ever so slightly. You didn't need to invent brewing to start selecting for fermentation. You just needed to come back to the same place twice. And you do. You remember where the fig tree grows near the stream. You remember which season the berries fall and how long it takes before they change. This is subtle planning, Proto-scheduling, some anthropologists might say. Not agriculture, but not purely reactive either. You're beginning to think in days instead of moments. There's another layer here too. Fermented foods are safer in one important way. Alcohol kills pathogens. This is a modern scientific fact, but its effects would have mattered to you deeply. Drinking lightly alcoholic liquid could reduce the risk of waterborne illness. Some researchers argue this gave fermented drinks a survival advantage long before anyone cared about getting drunk. The debate is whether this benefit was significant enough at low alcohol concentrations to influence behaviour, or whether it's a convenient modern explanation layered onto something more psychological. As night falls again, you gather with others. Someone brings the honey water, someone else brings fruit mash in a skin bag. There's no ceremony yet, but there's expectation. You share. You watch each other's reactions closely. This is how knowledge spreads in your world, not through instruction, but imitation. Someone drinks too much again and pays for it. You learn where the edge might be by watching someone else fall over it. Something else is happening too, something harder to see. Voices get louder, gestures get bigger. Stories, half memories, half exaggerations, start flowing. This may be the earliest version of narrative intoxication. Altered states making humans talk more, embellish more, imagine more. One scholarly debate circles this idea carefully. Did intoxication play a role in the evolution of language complexity? Some argue lowered inhibitions encouraged vocal experimentation. Others dismiss it as romantic speculation. Sitting here, listening to sounds turn into something like stories. It doesn't feel entirely impossible. You sleep deeply afterward, but not peacefully. Dreams flicker again. Faces stretching, animals speaking, fire behaving strangely. There's no distinction yet between dream, vision, and imagination. They all feel equally real. Some anthropologists suggest repeated exposure to altered states could have trained early humans to accept non-ordinary experiences without panic, laying groundwork for spirituality much later. It's impossible to prove, but the pattern is tempting. By morning the group smells different, sour sweet, alive. Insects hover, someone wrinkles their nose, someone else smiles faintly. The decision to drink or not is becoming a choice, not just a mistake. That's new. You don't know it yet, but you are learning dosage, learning restraint, learning that a little of something strange can feel good, but too much can make you weak. This is a lesson that will echo for tens of thousands of years. As you move on again, the land feels less static. Places are no longer just food sources or shelters. Some places are remembered for how they made you feel. The hollow tree, the fig grove, the puddle that turned honey into something else. Memory is mapping sensation onto geography. You're not chasing escape. Not yet. You're experimenting quietly, clumsily with chemistry and consciousness. Sweetness plus time, curiosity plus risk. The world keeps offering you substances that do more than feed your body. And you are beginning to realize that eating is not always just about survival. You're no longer the only one noticing. That's the quiet shift. At first, fermented fruit felt like a private accident between you and the land. Now you see it mirrored in others. Recognition flickering across faces when the smell hits. A pause before eating, a grin that arrives a little too early. This knowledge is leaking through the group, not as language but as behaviour. And behaviour, in your world, is everything. You start paying attention to animals in a new way, not just as prey or threat, but as fellow participants in the same landscape experiments. You watch birds wobble after gorging on fallen fruit. You watch monkeys shriek and chase each other in sloppy arcs after raiding overripe trees. This is not imagination. Modern primatologists have documented ethanol consumption in dozens of species, and fruit trees in the wild can naturally reach alcohol levels strong enough to cause visible intoxication. That's a hard historical fact. The ecosystem itself produces drunkenness, whether humans are ready or not. Here's the quirky twist scholars love to mention. Some animals seem to seek out fermented fruit deliberately. Not every time, not obsessively, but often enough to raise eyebrows. This feeds into a fringe but persistent idea called the drunken monkey hypothesis, which suggests primates evolved a preference for alcohol because it signalled ripe, calorie-rich fruit. The theory is debated heavily. Critics say it overstates intention and ignores risk. But you, watching a troop return to the same tree day after day, can feel why the idea refuses to die. You learn by watching them, just as they watch you. Firelight nights begin to change tone. Someone mimics the animals, exaggerated stumbling and vocalizations drawing laughter. Laughter itself feels important now, more frequent, louder, contagious. Alcohol lowers inhibition, yes, but it also synchronizes emotion. When one person laughs, others follow. This is social glue in its rawest form. Anthropologists argue about whether shared intoxication strengthened group cohesion, enough to offer an evolutionary advantage. Some say yes, groups that bonded better survived better. Others counter that the risks outweighed the benefits. Sitting here, wrapped in shared warmth and noise, it's easy to see why the argument never settles. But intoxication isn't just social, it's perceptual. Sounds stretch. The crackle of fire feels rhythmic. Shadows on cave walls move in ways that suggest intention. You start seeing shapes where none were meant to be seen. This matters because humans are pattern seekers to a fault. Add alcohol, and that tendency ramps up. One scholarly debate circles this exact moment in prehistory. Did altered states accelerate symbolic thinking? Did seeing meaning in randomness help birth art, myth, or religion? Or is that just modern humans projecting romance backward onto survival behaviour? There's no consensus. There may never be. Still, you feel something shift when someone traces lines in ash on stone, laughing as if it means something. It might not. Or it might be the first time imagination steps outside the skull and leaves a mark. There's danger here too. Someone eats fermented fruit that has gone too far. Mouldy, toxic. They get sick. Very sick. This is another historical truth often glossed over. Fermentation is not always safe. Some moulds produce deadly toxins. Without microbiology, the line between pleasantly altered and fatally poisoned is thin. You learn this line through loss, through fear, through memory burned sharp enough not to fade. And yet, you don't stop. Instead, you refine. You notice which fruits are safer, which smells signal good fermentation versus death. This is empirical learning, repeated over generations. It's not written, but it's transmitted. Children watch elders wrinkle noses or nod approval. Over time, instinct builds where knowledge once was. This is where the scholarly argument gets especially tense. Are you already practicing a form of proto-chemistry? Some researchers say yes. This is observation, hypothesis, testing, and revision. Others say that's anachronistic nonsense. You're not a scientist, you're hungry. Both can be true. Survival demands experimentation, whether or not you name it. The high itself begins to feel familiar, less shocking, more navigable. You learn that eating before drinking changes the effect. You learn that fatigue amplifies it. You learn slowly, painfully, that some people react differently than others. This individual variation, tolerance, sensitivity, is another modern insight that would have mattered then. Groups begin to implicitly assign roles. Some drink more and become loud storytellers. Some drink less and stay watchful. Not everyone gets to drift. There's a subtle power dynamic forming here. Those who can handle intoxication without collapsing earn a strange respect. Not leadership exactly, but attention. Later societies will formalize this. Priests, shamans, ritual specialists. But right now it's informal and fluid. Still, the seeds are there. Dreams intensify again. This time, you remember them longer. You tell fragments of them the next day, using gestures and sounds. Others nod, even when they don't fully understand. Shared confusion becomes shared meaning. One anthropological debate asks whether altered states helped normalize internal experiences, thoughts, dreams, visions, as things worth sharing. Without that normalization, complex culture struggles to form. Again, impossible to prove. Again, hard to dismiss. The landscape feels different now. Trees are not just trees. Some are remembered for what they offer after falling. Seasons are not just weather. They are timers. This awareness, time layered onto environment, is crucial. It's a stepping stone toward intentional production, even if you don't realize it yet. You're still nomadic, still fragile, still one injury away from death. But your relationship with the world is deepening. You're learning that the environment doesn't just feed you, it can change you. And perhaps most importantly, you are learning that your mind is not fixed. It can be bent, softened, expanded, narrowed. That realization is dangerous and intoxicating, all on its own. Long before words like drunk or high exist, you already understand the feeling, and once understood, it cannot be unknown. Fire changes everything, and you already know that. You know how it tastes when it touches meat, how it scares predators, how it pulls people closer together at night. But fire also does something quieter, something less obvious. It gives you control over transformation. And once you have that, you start wondering what else can be changed on purpose. You begin cooking roots that once made your mouth numb. You roast seeds that were too bitter to eat raw. This is a historical fact archaeologists largely agree on. Early humans used fire not just for warmth and safety, but to detoxify plants. Heat breaks down chemical defenses. That knowledge doesn't come from theory. It comes from trial, error, and the occasional very bad outcome. And as you experiment with plants and heat, you start noticing something else. Some plants don't just become edible, they become strange. You burn leaves and inhale the smoke because the insects do it first, fleeing in confused spirals. The smoke smells sharp, resinous. It makes your eyes water, but it also makes your head feel light. You cough, laugh, cough again. This isn't alcohol. This is different, faster, shorter, more vivid. Modern science would tell you that smoke delivers compounds to the brain almost immediately. You don't know that. You just know that fire plus plant equals feeling. This is where historians start to tread carefully, because evidence gets thin. We don't have Paleolithic pipes or joints, but we do have something else. Charred plant remains, including psychoactive species found in ancient hearths. And we have ethnographic parallels, modern hunter-gatherer societies that use smoke intentionally for altered states. The debate is whether early humans recognized these effects deliberately, or stumbled into them while using fire for other purposes. As always, the answer might be both. You learn which plants make the smoke pleasant and which make it unbearable. Some calm you, some make your heart race, some make shadows dance too enthusiastically. This experimentation is risky. Inhaling the wrong smoke can kill you. People die this way. Their deaths become warnings encoded in gesture and avoidance rather than words. Here's a quirky detail that surprises modern readers. Many psychoactive plants are most potent after processing, drying, heating, crushing. In other words, fire doesn't just unlock food, it unlocks chemistry. That means the mastery of fire may have dramatically expanded the range of mind-altering substances available to you. This is one reason some scholars argue that widespread psychoactive use could not have occurred before controlled fire. Others push back, pointing out that fermentation alone was enough. The timeline remains contested. Your nights change again. The fire is no longer just warmth, it's a tool. People add specific plants to it. Someone noticed the difference first, and now others follow. There's laughter, then silence, then a strange shared stillness. You stare into flames and feel as if they are staring back. This is not just intoxication, it's attention turned inward. A scholarly debate hovers here like smoke. Are these early altered states the roots of meditation, ritual, and religion? Some researchers argue that focusing attention under altered conditions trained the brain for sustained inner experience. Others argue that we are retrofitting meaning onto what was essentially recreational or accidental drug use. Sitting here, watching everyone fall quiet at once, it doesn't feel purely accidental. There's fear too. Someone panics, convinced something is moving in the dark beyond the fire. Others reassure them, placing hands on shoulders. This collective management of altered states is important. You're learning not just how to get high, but how to guide someone through it. That skill will become power later. Fire also lets you store things. You dry plants, you keep them. This is new. Before, everything was immediate. Now, some substances can be saved for later. That alone changes your relationship with time. You're no longer entirely at the mercy of chance discovery. You can plan a little. Alcohol too benefits from fire, not directly but indirectly. Heated containers, sealed skins, fired clay much later. Fire leads to vessels. Vessels lead to storage. Storage leads to consistency. You're not there yet, but the path has opened. The chemistry of intoxication is slowly becoming domesticated. Your body adapts. Repeated exposure changes how you react. This is another modern fact with ancient roots. Tolerance is biological. The more often you experience an altered state, the less intense it feels. That pushes experimentation further. A little no longer does what it once did. The edge moves. This is dangerous territory. Not everyone crosses it safely. Some people chase the feeling too hard and neglect other duties. Others are mocked, avoided, quietly sidelined. This is the earliest hint of social regulation. Unspoken rules about when and how it's acceptable to alter your mind. These rules are inconsistent, situational, and enforced through shame rather than law. But they exist. You begin to associate certain states with certain contexts. Smoke at night by the fire. Fermented fruit after long travel. Not before a hunt. Not when danger is near. This contextualization matters. It prevents chaos. It also lays groundwork for ritual. Dreams and waking visions start to blur. Someone claims to have seen an ancestor in the smoke. Someone else insists the fire spoke. Are they lying? Are they confused? Or are they experiencing something real within their own perception? The group doesn't have a framework to decide. Instead, it listens. This is how authority begins. Not through strength alone, but through access to experiences others can't easily reach. Modern scholars debate whether psychoactive use created specialists, proto-shamans, or whether specialists adopted substances later. Cause and effect are tangled. But you can feel the shift. Altered states are no longer random. They are becoming meaningful. Fire crackles. Smoke curls upward, carrying scent and memory. You inhale, exhale, and feel your thoughts loosen their grip. The world hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. You are learning slowly that consciousness itself is malleable, and once fire shows you that transformation can be controlled, you will never stop wondering what else can be changed, inside you or out. At some point the accidents stop feeling accidental. Not all at once, not announced, but gradually. Like realizing you've been walking the same path so often, it's worn smooth beneath your feet. You still discover fermentation by chance, but now, when it happens, you recognize it. And recognition is the first step toward intention. You begin setting things aside instead of forgetting them. Fruit in a hollow, grain-like seeds soaked and left near warmth. Honey diluted on purpose, not just spilled. This is where historians draw a careful line. The first intentional alcohol does not require agriculture, but it does require foresight. Archaeological evidence from sites dating back more than 13,000 years shows residues consistent with deliberately fermented beverages, mixtures of fruit, honey, and wild grains. This isn't farming yet. It's brewing without fields. You don't call it brewing. You just know that if you do this and then wait, something happens. The waiting matters. It's uncomfortable at first. Waiting means not eating now in exchange for something later, and that goes against every survival instinct you've evolved. But you've learned that what comes later can be different, stronger, worth it. This is a subtle cognitive shift, delaying gratification for an altered reward. Some evolutionary psychologists argue that this ability to postpone immediate consumption was crucial for later complex behaviours, from food storage to social contracts. Alcohol may have been one of the earliest teachers of patience. When you taste the result, it's more consistent than before, still unpredictable but less chaotic. The warmth arrives reliably, the laughter follows, the headaches too if you overdo it. You're learning dosage not just individually, but collectively. Someone suggests stopping after a certain point, not with words, but by physically taking the container away. No one argues. The group remembers last time. Here's a quirky detail that surprises people. Early alcoholic drinks were likely weak by modern standards, often closer to beer or cider than wine or spirits. Distillation won't exist for millennia, but weak doesn't mean insignificant. For bodies unaccustomed to regular intoxication, even low alcohol content is powerful, and consumed communally, it amplifies emotion more than impairment. You start associating this drink with certain moments, after a successful hunt, before a long migration, during conflict resolution. This is a key historical insight. Alcohol may have functioned as a social lubricant long before it was recreational. Some scholars argue it helped reduce aggression during tense negotiations, making group cohesion easier to maintain. Others argue that's wishful thinking, pointing out that alcohol also fuels violence. The truth, as usual, is probably situational. In small, familiar groups, shared intoxication might calm. In large, unstable ones, it might inflame. Containers begin to matter. You experiment with skins, gourds, carved wood. Some work better than others, some leak, some grow mould. You learn which materials ruin the drink and which protect it. This trial and error process lays groundwork for later pottery, though you're not there yet. Still, the idea that a vessel can preserve transformation is new and important. Something else changes too. Ownership. Who made the drink? Who waited for it? Who gets to decide when it's shared? These questions create friction. You don't have property laws, but you have memory and reputation. Someone who hoards is watched closely. Someone who shares gains goodwill. Alcohol becomes a social currency, one that must be managed carefully. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether alcohol production pushed humans towards sedentary life. The famous beer before bread hypothesis suggests people settled down to grow grains specifically to make alcohol, not food. Critics argue this exaggerates alcohol's importance and ignores survival pressures. But here, on the ground, the appeal is obvious. Staying near a place where good fermentation happens is tempting. Mobility begins to feel optional, at least temporarily. The drink itself begins to acquire meaning beyond its effects. Someone spills it accidentally and looks genuinely distressed. Another pours a little onto the ground before drinking, as if acknowledging something unseen. Is this ritual, or just habit layered with feeling? Anthropologists debate where ritual begins, whether it requires belief, or whether repeated meaningful action is enough. If it's the latter, you're already there. Your body adapts further. Tolerance creeps in. The first sip no longer hits the same way. You drink a little more. Others do too. This arms race between biology and chemistry will never truly end. But for now, limits are still close enough to see. You still know when to stop, most of the time. Not everyone participates equally. Some avoid the drink entirely, watching from the edges. They are not shunned, they are necessary. Someone has to stay sharp. This division of roles, intoxicated and sober, becomes normalized. Later societies will formalize it with priests and guards and designated drinkers. Right now, it's just practical. Dreams after these nights are heavier, slower, filled with repetition. You dream of the same scenes again and again, slightly altered. Memory consolidates differently under alcohol. That's a modern neurological fact. But its effects would have mattered then too. Stories told after drinking stick better. Emotions attached to them more strongly. This may be one reason shared intoxication strengthens group identity. You remember together. The drink doesn't solve your problems. Hunger returns, danger returns, death is still close, but it changes how you face these things. Fear is dulled briefly. Bonds feel stronger. The future feels less abstract. You're no longer just discovering intoxication. You are making it. And that distinction between stumbling into a high and preparing one marks a turning point. From here on, altered states are not just gifts from chance. They are tools you can reach for, with all the responsibility and risk that implies. You lift the container again, feeling its weight, its promise. You waited for this, you chose this. And the world feels different when you realize you can choose how your mind feels, even if only for a while. Tools change how you think, you already know this. A sharper stone doesn't just cut better, it changes what you believe is possible. And now, slowly, clumsily, you're building tools not just for survival, but for sensation. Pits dug into the earth begin to serve purposes beyond storage. Some stay cool, some stay damp, some keep light out. You notice that certain conditions make your fermented drinks better, stronger, more predictable. Archaeologists have found prehistoric pits with chemical residues suggesting repeated fermentation events, not random decay. That's a key historical fact. By the late Stone Age, people were modifying environments specifically to encourage fermentation. You don't call it chemistry. You call it that place where it works. Someone lines a pit with stone. Someone else covers it with leaves. These small innovations stack. This is Stone Age party science. Unwritten, communal, and brutally honest in its feedback. If it works, it spreads. If it kills someone, it stops. Mostly. There's a quirky fringe idea that early humans may have preferred slightly spoiled or fermented foods because they were softer and easier to chew, especially for elders with worn teeth. Alcohol would have been a side effect, not the goal. Critics argue this doesn't explain deliberate storage or repeated behaviour. Standing here, watching people carefully tend a pit they won't open for days, it's hard to believe the effects are incidental anymore. Preparation becomes social. Several people contribute ingredients, several people wait. When it's ready, several people drink. This shared investment changes the emotional weight of the experience. It's not just about getting drunk. It's about having participated. Anthropologists note that communal production tends to intensify communal identity. Alcohol becomes a focal point for that process. You also notice something else. People behave differently depending on who is watching. Intoxication becomes performative. Some exaggerate their drunkenness. Some suppress it. This suggests a growing awareness of social norms around altered states. Getting drunk is no longer just a physical reaction. It's a role you play. There's laughter, but there's also negotiation. Old tensions resurface. Someone brings up a past slight they've never dared mention sober. Alcohol lowers inhibition, yes, but it also lowers emotional defences. This can heal or harm. A scholarly debate asks whether alcohol was more often a stabilising force or a destabilising one in early societies. The answer likely depends on group size and stress levels. In small bands, resolution might outweigh conflict. In larger ones, chaos might win. You learn timing. Drinking before night watch is frowned upon. Drinking after communal labour is celebrated. These are rules, even if no one calls them that. They are enforced through looks, laughter, exclusion. This is social regulation in its earliest form. Tools evolve alongside habits. Someone invents a crude stirring stick. Someone else realizes crushing fruit speeds things up. These are minor innovations, but they matter. Each one shortens the gap between intention and effect. Alcohol production becomes less mysterious, more reliable, and reliability invites repetition. Here's another historical insight. Repeated communal drinking likely contributed to the development of feasting. Feasts are not just about calories, they are about surplus, display and obligation. Alcohol amplifies all three. Some scholars argue that feasting traditions emerged partly because intoxicants made them memorable and emotionally binding. Others argue feasting drove alcohol use, not the other way around. Either way, the two are tangled tightly. You notice how children watch. They're not drinking yet, but they're absorbing everything. Who pours, who waits, who overdoes it and becomes an object lesson. Cultural knowledge is forming in real time. No one sits them down to explain it. They learn by observing consequences. There's a moment, small, easy to miss, when someone suggests saving some for later instead of finishing it all. That suggestion would have been unthinkable before. Now it's accepted. This is surplus thinking. This is planning beyond immediate pleasure. Alcohol, ironically, is teaching restraint. But not everyone learns the lesson. Someone drinks too much again, stumbles, injures themselves. They survive, but they're mocked gently afterward. Humour becomes a corrective tool. It allows the group to acknowledge danger without panic. This too is cultural adaptation. As the night deepens, the drink does its familiar work. Voices soften, distances shrink. People lean closer to the fire, to each other. Someone hums a tune that has no words and doesn't need them. Rhythm emerges, hands tapping, feet shifting. This is not music yet, not fully, but it's close. A scholarly debate hovers here. Did intoxication play a role in the development of rhythm, dance, and coordinated movement? Some argue altered states enhance pattern recognition and synchronization. Others say humans were rhythmic long before alcohol. Both can be true. Alcohol doesn't invent rhythm, it amplifies it. You feel tired, heavy, calm. The pit is covered again. The tools are set aside. The work is done for now. Tomorrow you'll move on, or maybe you won't. The place has become important. You lie back, staring at stars blurred slightly by drink and smoke. You are safe for the moment, fed, connected, altered. You have turned a chemical accident into a social technology, and without realizing it, you've taken another step toward a world where getting drunk is not just something that happens, but something people organize their lives around, carefully and collectively, long before anyone writes a rule about it. You don't notice it at first because it feels so natural, like breathing warmer air when you step closer to the fire. But something fundamental has shifted. Drinking together isn't just something you do anymore, it's something that does something to you, to all of you. And once a behaviour reliably changes how a group feels, it starts to matter in ways that go far beyond the liquid itself. Trust is expensive. In your world, misplaced trust can get you killed. Yet here you are, sitting close, relaxed, exposing your throat and back, laughing with people who could hurt you if they wanted. Alcohol didn't create trust from nothing, but it lowered the cost of expressing it. That's a historical insight many anthropologists agree on. Shared intoxication reduces perceived social threat, at least temporarily. It makes closeness easier. You start noticing patterns. Disputes resolved after drinking tend to stay resolved longer. Not always, but often enough that people remember. Someone wronged speaks more freely. Someone who caused harm listens more patiently. Alcohol doesn't make anyone wiser, but it makes emotional exchange less guarded. This is one reason some scholars argue early alcohol functioned as a social lubricant in the most literal sense, reducing friction in small group dynamics. Others disagree strongly. They point out that alcohol also increases impulsivity and aggression. Both sides are right. The difference lies in context. You are not a city. You are not strangers packed together. You are a small band with shared history. In that setting, the glue often outweighs the spark. Here's a quirky but telling detail. Modern neuroscience shows that alcohol increases oxytocin release, the same hormone involved in bonding, touch, and trust. You don't know that, obviously, but your body does. You feel it in the way sitting shoulder to shoulder feels less uncomfortable, in the way eye contact lasts longer, in the way laughter feels shared, not individual. This bonding has consequences. Groups that drink together start to feel like units, not just collections of individuals. Loyalty strengthens. Outsiders feel more distant. Alcohol becomes a boundary marker, subtle but real. Who is invited to drink matters, who is excluded notices. This is where power quietly creeps in. Someone controls access to the drink, not through force, but through knowledge, where the pit is, when it's ready, how it's made. That person gains influence, not absolute authority, but a voice that carries weight. Later societies will formalize this role into brewers, priests, tavern keepers. Right now, it's informal, but it's there. A scholarly debate circles this moment. Did alcohol contribute to emerging social hierarchies? Some argue it accelerated inequality by giving certain individuals leverage. Others argue its communal nature flattened hierarchies by emphasizing sharing. Both patterns appear in the archaeological record depending on time and place. Here, it's still fluid. Influence shifts. Nothing is fixed. You notice that after drinking together, cooperation feels easier the next day. Tasks flow with fewer arguments. People anticipate each other's needs. This isn't magic. It's memory. Emotional memory. Alcohol-linked experiences are remembered more vividly for better or worse. Shared vulnerability leaves a mark, but there's a shadow side. Someone begins to rely on the drink not just for bonding, but for courage. They won't speak unless they've had some. They won't relax without it. This is subtle, not yet addiction in the modern sense, but it's a dependency forming. You notice it. Others do too. It's met with concern, not condemnation. The group adjusts, limits access, changes timing. Early harm reduction, you might call it. Children absorb all of this. They learn that drinking is tied to togetherness, to stories, to nighttime safety. They also learn that excess leads to embarrassment or injury. These lessons sink deep. Long before formal education, culture is teaching dosage and meaning. Night after night, the pattern repeats. Not constantly. There are long stretches without intoxication, but often enough to become familiar. Alcohol becomes a punctuation mark in your lives. Not everyday speech, but something reserved for emphasis. You also notice that strangers feel different after you drink together. Suspicion fades faster. Jokes land more easily. This matters for alliances, mating, trade. Some anthropologists argue that intoxicants facilitated early intergroup interactions by reducing fear. Others argue they made such encounters riskier. Again, both outcomes likely occurred. Survival selected for groups that learned when to use the tool and when to put it away. The fire burns low. Someone refills the container. Someone else gently stops them. The balance holds. You feel connected, not just to people, but to the moment itself. This feeling, this sense of shared presence, is intoxicating even without the drink. Alcohol just helps you notice it. Long after the effects fade, the bond remains. That's the real power. The drink doesn't last. The memory does. You fall asleep knowing who is beside you, who you can trust, who belongs. In a world without walls or laws, that knowledge is everything. Alcohol has become more than a substance. It's a social glue. Messy, imperfect, sometimes dangerous, but undeniably effective. And once humans discover a reliable way to feel connected, they rarely give it up. Alcohol is no longer alone. You start noticing plants that don't need waiting or pits or patience. Plants that act immediately. Plants that don't warm and soften, but open and stretch. At first, they arrive quietly, almost accidentally. Mushrooms sprouting after rain, their caps unfamiliar but tempting. Poppy-like flowers oozing bitter sap when broken. Fibrous leaves chewed out of curiosity and spat out, except for the strange calm that follows. This is where intoxication stops being just social and starts becoming visionary. One historical fact archaeologists agree on cautiously is that humans encountered psychoactive plants extremely early. Many of these plants grow aggressively in disturbed ground, places humans already frequent. Psilocybin mushrooms thrive in animal dung. Poppies grow in open fields. Cannabis grows fast and wild. You don't have to search for them. They come to you. The first time you eat the wrong, or right, mushroom, the world doesn't tilt like it does with alcohol. It blooms. Colours intensify. Sounds gain texture. Time stretches thin, then thick. You are awake, but not quite here. Fear flares, then dissolves. You see patterns layered over everything, as if reality has an extra skin you'd never noticed. You don't laugh the same way. You don't talk as much. You stare. You listen. Someone panics. Someone else sits perfectly still, eyes wide, breathing slow. This is not a substance for crowds, at least not yet. It's unpredictable, potent. The group learns quickly. This is not for everyone, not every time. It demands respect in a way alcohol never quite did. Here's a quirky detail that modern researchers find fascinating. Many psychoactive plants taste bad, bitter, numbing, sharp. This suggests humans didn't stumble into them for pleasure alone. Some scholars argue that early use may have been driven by medicinal experimentation, pain relief, sedation, antiparasitic effects, with altered consciousness as a side effect. Others argue the visions were the point. The debate remains unresolved. Your body reacts strongly. Nausea comes and goes. The fire breathes. Shadows move independently of their sources. You feel watched, not by predators, but by something closer, something inside. This is not escapism. This is confrontation. Someone later claims they spoke to an ancestor. Someone else insists they became an animal. Are they lying, embellishing, or struggling to translate an experience that doesn't fit ordinary language? The group doesn't know how to judge. Instead, it listens. This listening matters. A scholarly debate centres on this exact moment. Did psychedelics play a role in the emergence of spirituality and symbolic thought? Some researchers argue altered states provided the raw material for myth, visions interpreted as gods, spirits, ancestors. Others argue spirituality predates drugs and simply absorbed them later. There's no clear answer. But sitting here, watching meaning get assigned to the ineffable, it's hard to deny the influence. The next day, the group treats the mushroom eater differently. Not better, not worse, just carefully. Their words carry weight. Their experience is acknowledged even if it isn't fully understood. This is the birth of a role. Not leader, not healer, but something adjacent. Someone who has gone somewhere and come back. You notice that these plants don't lend themselves to casual use. You don't chew them while walking. You don't share them freely. They're rare, seasonal, and powerful. That scarcity adds to their gravity. Unlike alcohol, which binds horizontally, these substances pull vertically, upward, inward. There's danger here too. Someone eats the wrong mushroom and doesn't come back at all. This is another historical truth often softened in retelling. Early drug experimentation killed people. Poisonous plants and fungi don't announce themselves clearly. Trial and error leaves bodies behind. The knowledge that survives does so because it is encoded with fear and caution. Over time, patterns emerge. Certain plants are only consumed under supervision. Certain amounts are never exceeded. Certain settings, dark caves, quiet clearings, are preferred. This is not recreational use. It's structured, even if no one calls it ritual yet. You start seeing images differently. Animals feel symbolic. Lines scratched into stone feel intentional. Cave walls begin to collect marks, dots, handprints, shapes that seem to pulse when remembered. Some archaeologists argue that early cave art reflects syntoptic imagery, patterns commonly seen during altered states. Others argue that speculative projection, but the overlap between psychedelic visuals and ancient art is striking enough to keep the debate alive. Unlike alcohol, these plants don't smooth social edges. They sharpen them. Conversations afterward are intense, hushed. People argue about meaning, about what was seen, about what it means to be human. These are not practical discussions, but they linger. Children are kept away. This boundary is clear, not because of law, but because of fear. The plants demand maturity, not biological age, but psychological readiness. This is the earliest form of age restriction, enforced socially. You feel changed afterward, not relaxed, not bonded, changed. Questions stick to you. Death feels closer, but less final. Identity feels less solid. This can be unsettling, or empowering, or both. Some people seek the experience again, others avoid it forever. This split is important. It introduces diversity of inner life within the group. Not everyone shares the same understanding of reality anymore. Managing that difference becomes a challenge. There's a fringe idea, still controversial, that repeated psychedelic use may have influenced the evolution of human consciousness itself, increasing openness, creativity, and pattern recognition. Critics call it unfalsifiable. Supporters point to neurological effects and cultural parallels. You don't know any of that. You just know that after seeing the world dissolve and reform, it's hard to believe it was ever as simple as you thought. Alcohol lets you feel closer to others. These plants let you feel closer to something else, something vast, unnamed, and slightly terrifying. You don't abandon alcohol. You don't replace it. You add to your toolkit. Different substances for different needs, different states for different questions. The land around you is no longer just food and shelter. It's a pharmacy, a library, a doorway, and you're beginning to understand that being human isn't just about surviving the world as it is, but about finding ways to experience it as something more. Not everyone is meant to walk through the doorway. That realization settles slowly, after watching too many people struggle to carry what they found on the other side. Alcohol is communal. You fall into it together and come back laughing, bruised but mostly intact. These other substances don't work like that. They separate. They pull one person inward while everyone else waits outside, uneasy, watchful. So the group adapts. You notice it first in who suggests using the plants. It's no longer casual curiosity. It's specific people. Those who seem calmer in altered states. Those who don't panic when reality loosens its grip. They're not stronger or smarter necessarily. They're just suited. The group begins deferring to them, quietly, instinctively. This is the earliest shape of the shaman, though no one has a word for it yet. A historical fact archaeologists and anthropologists broadly agree on is that specialized ritual leaders appear very early in human societies, often associated with healing, divination, and altered states. What's debated is the order of operations. Did shamans exist first and adopt psychoactive substances as tools? Or did certain individuals become specialists because they alone could safely navigate those substances? From where you're standing, it feels like the latter. The first time someone deliberately guides another through a psychedelic experience, something changes permanently. They sit close. They speak softly. They reassure when fear spikes. They explain afterward, offering meaning, framing visions, translating chaos into story. This guidance doesn't make the experience less intense, but it makes it survivable. Here's a quirky but telling detail. In many modern indigenous cultures, shamans describe their role not as leaders, but as intermediaries, between worlds, between states, between people and meaning. That framing likely has deep roots. You can feel it forming now. This person doesn't command, they interpret. Authority shifts accordingly. The shaman doesn't control food or weapons, they control context. When a plant is taken, where, how much, who is present. These boundaries are crucial. Without them, panic spreads. With them, fear becomes manageable. The group learns to trust this structure, even if it doesn't fully understand it. A scholarly debate hums beneath this development. Did altered states create religion, or did religion organize altered states? Some argue belief systems arose to explain psychedelic experiences. Others argue ritual frameworks existed first and drugs simply intensified them. The archaeological record can't settle this cleanly. But what's clear is that once interpretation enters the picture, experiences stop being purely personal. They become cultural. Alcohol never required interpretation. You drink, you feel, you recover. These plants demand explanation. What did you see? What did it mean? Was it a message, a warning, a lie? The answers matter because they influence behaviour. Decisions get justified by visions. Choices gain supernatural weight. This is power, and the group knows it. Not everyone trusts it. Some avoid these experiences entirely. They view them as destabilizing, dangerous, unnecessary. This tension is ancient and persistent, the pull between order and transcendence. Groups that lean too hard into vision lose cohesion. Groups that suppress it entirely lose adaptability. The balance is fragile. You see that balance negotiated in small ways. The shaman doesn't speak on every issue. Their insight is sought for illness, death, uncertainty, not for hunting routes or tool-making. Boundaries protect the group from overreach. Healing becomes part of the role. Some psychoactive plants dull pain, slow breathing, induce sleep. Modern science confirms what you're learning empirically. Many of these substances have real medicinal properties. But healing here isn't just physical, it's emotional. Someone grieving is guided through a night of visions, then welcomed back with care. The experience doesn't erase loss, but it reshapes it. There's a fringe idea, still debated, that early shamans may have functioned as proto-psychotherapists, using altered states to help individuals process trauma. Critics argue this projects modern psychology backward. Supporters point to cross-cultural consistency and ritual healing. You don't have theories. You just see someone who was broken stand a little straighter afterward. Alcohol plays a supporting role now. It prepares. It soothes. It brings people together before and after the deeper journey. The two substances begin to form a system, one for bonding, one for meaning. This division will echo across cultures for millennia. Symbols start to stabilize. Certain animals recur in stories. Certain shapes are drawn again and again. These are not random anymore. They are anchors, ways to communicate ineffable experiences to those who haven't had them. Cave walls become shared memory storage. A scholarly debate flares around this point. Are these symbols born from altered state hallucinations, or from observation of the natural world, later enhanced by drugs? The answer is likely recursive. Nature inspires vision. Vision reshapes how nature is seen. The loop tightens. Children are told stories now, not just warnings. Stories about journeys beyond the firelight, about beings that teach and test. These stories are not literal instructions, but they prepare the mind. They create expectation. An expectation shapes experience, a fact modern neuroscience confirms, but you feel intuitively. Belief and chemistry are already entwined. There are failures. Someone misinterprets a vision and makes a poor decision. Someone claims authority they haven't earned. The group pushes back. Trust is withdrawn. This feedback loop is harsh but effective. Charisma alone is not enough. Results matter. Over time, the role stabilizes. Not permanent, not hereditary, at least not yet, but recognized. This person fasts before rituals, abstains sometimes, observes taboos. These behaviors mark separation. They signal that access to altered states carries responsibility. You watch all of this unfold without realizing how foundational it is. Future civilizations will build temples, priesthoods, entire cosmologies around this pattern. But right now, it's intimate. One fire, one plant, one person guiding another through fear. You feel a strange mix of awe and caution. These experiences are powerful, but they are not for everyday use. They open doors that don't always close easily. The group understands this instinctively. So intoxication splits along a fault line. Alcohol belongs to the many. Visionary plants belong to the few. One builds society outward. The other reaches inward and upward. Both change what it means to be human. And as you sit there, listening to the shaman speak softly about a world layered beneath this one, you realize that leadership no longer comes only from strength or age. It comes from having gone somewhere dangerous and knowing how to bring meaning back. You start noticing the walls, not just as shelter, not just as boundaries against wind and cold, but as surfaces that hold attention. Cave walls ripple in firelight. Stone faces breathe when shadows slide across them. After certain nights, especially the quiet inward ones guided by plants, the walls feel closer, more responsive, as if they're waiting for something. Someone reaches out and touches the rock. The gesture is small, almost unconscious. Fingers trace a line where the stone dips and rises. Later, charcoal is involved. Red earth, ash mixed with fat. A hand pressed flat, pigment blown around it. When the hand pulls away, something impossible remains, absence made visible. This is one of those rare moments where archaeology gives us solid ground. Cave art appears astonishingly early, tens of thousands of years ago, fully formed, sophisticated, symbolic. That's a historical fact that still unsettles researchers. The debate isn't whether early humans made art, it's why it appears so suddenly, so confidently. Altered states hover at the centre of that debate. Some scholars argue that many cave paintings resemble entoptic patterns, dots, zigzags, grids, visual effects commonly reported during psychedelic experiences and trance states. Others point out the animals are anatomically precise, clearly based on careful observation. The argument turns bitter sometimes, as if art must be either hallucination or skill. Sitting here, watching someone paint a bison whose flank seems to move in the firelight, it's obvious that both can coexist. Alcohol plays a role too, though a quieter one. A little drink loosens the hand, softens self-consciousness. You're less afraid to mark the wall when you don't feel so separate from the group, or from the moment. Creativity flows easier when fear steps aside. Here's a quirky detail researchers love. Some caves show signs of acoustics being deliberately used. Certain chambers amplify sound dramatically. Clapping echoes unnaturally. Voices stretch and fold. Paintings cluster in these resonant spaces. The fringe idea, still debated, is that early humans may have combined sound, art, and altered states into immersive experiences. Not performances, not rituals exactly. Something closer to total environments. You experience it yourself. Someone hums, the sound blooms. The wall seems to pulse in time. Painted animals feel alive, not representational. This isn't decoration, it's interaction. The group grows quiet in these spaces. Voices lower automatically. There's a sense, shared, unspoken, that something is listening. Is this spirituality, or just awe? Scholars argue endlessly about where one ends and the other begins, but awe is enough to change behaviour. Awe makes you careful, awe makes you remember. Stories begin to attach to images, not fixed narratives yet, but associations. This animal appears during hunts. That symbol appears during sickness. The wall becomes a memory map. You don't need writing when you have place-bound meaning. Children are brought here carefully, not during the deepest altered states, but after. They're shown the marks, told fragments. This is education, but not instruction. It's orientation, learning where your people's thoughts live outside their heads. A scholarly debate circles this moment. Did art emerge as communication, or as byproduct of altered perception? Some argue art externalized internal experiences, making them shareable. Others argue art served practical social functions, teaching, coordination, identity, and altered states simply intensified engagement. Once again, the answer refuses to be singular. You notice repetition. Certain shapes recur. Certain animals dominate. Predators appear more than prey sometimes. Why? One theory suggests altered states amplify emotionally charged imagery. Fear, reverence, danger. Another suggests these animals were central to survival and myth regardless of intoxication. Both explanations reinforce each other. There are risks here too. Someone becomes too absorbed, loses track of time, forgets the fire. Someone else panics in the enclosed space, feeling trapped. The group learns limits. Not every cave is used. Not every night is appropriate. Context matters. Over time, the cave becomes more than a place. It becomes a threshold. Outside is everyday life, movement, hunger, noise. Inside is something else, slower, heavier, meaningful. Alcohol belongs mostly outside. Visionary plants belong mostly inside. The boundary is respected. This division influences how you think about the mind itself. There are outside thoughts, practical, immediate, and inside thoughts, deep, symbolic, unsettling. You don't have words for this, but you feel it. The environment scaffolds cognition. Modern researchers debate whether such spatial organization helped humans develop abstract thinking, assigning different modes of thought to different contexts. Critics argue abstraction doesn't require caves. Supporters point to how consistently humans ritualize space. You can feel why. Space teaches the brain how to behave. You watch someone paint after a guided vision. They don't copy what they saw exactly, they translate it. This translation is important. It strips away personal detail and leaves shared form. That process, compression, symbolization, is foundational to culture. Alcohol helps afterward. It smooths the return. People drink, laugh softly, ease back into bodies and names. This pairing, deep experience followed by social grounding, becomes a pattern. Without it, people linger too long in altered states. With it, they reintegrate. There's a fringe idea that early art functioned as a kind of psychological anchor, helping individuals who experienced intense altered states reorient themselves afterward. Critics say there's no evidence. Supporters say the evidence is the art itself, persistent, placed, revisited. Standing here, touching the same mark made seasons ago, it feels stabilizing. The wall holds what the mind cannot. Over generations, styles emerge, techniques improve. The art doesn't get simpler, it gets more confident. This challenges the idea that early humans were cognitively primitive. On the contrary, they are bold, experimental, expressive. Altered states didn't diminish intelligence. They may have encouraged its display. You begin to associate certain images with certain feelings. Calm, fear, focus. These associations guide behavior. Before a hunt, people gather near specific markings. Before a journey, others. The images don't control reality, but they organize intention. Scholars argue whether this counts as proto-religion, or proto-art, or proto-science. The labels don't matter here. What matters is function. These practices help you cope with uncertainty, coordinate action, and process emotion. That's enough. You leave the cave feeling different. Not intoxicated anymore, but marked. The image follows you. You see its shape in clouds, in tracks, in shadows. This is pattern-seeking intensified, not extinguished. Alcohol made you feel closer to others. Visionary plants made you feel closer to something beyond. Art makes those experiences stay. You glance back once more at the dark mouth of the cave. Inside, the wall waits, patient. It will outlast you. It already has. And for the first time, you understand that humans aren't just changing their minds with substances. They are learning how to leave pieces of those changed minds behind, so others can find them later, touch them, and feel something stir in return. You start staying longer, not because the land suddenly changed, but because your reasons did. There are places now that matter beyond food density or shelter. Places where things are made, carefully, deliberately, and where leaving too soon feels like abandoning something unfinished. This is where the old rhythm of constant movement begins to stutter. The drink is part of that. You've learned that certain wild grasses, when soaked and left near warmth, ferment more reliably than fruit ever did. They don't taste sweet at first. Raw, they're hard, fibrous, unimpressive. But once processed, crushed, soaked, waited on, they transform. The resulting drink is cloudy, sour, filling. It doesn't hit as fast as fruit fermentation, but it lasts longer. It feels substantial. Here's the historical fact that still sparks arguments in conference halls. Residues from ancient sites suggest humans were fermenting wild grains before they were baking bread from them, in some cases by thousands of years. The timeline overlaps messily, but the implication is clear enough to be uncomfortable. Alcohol may not have been a byproduct of agriculture. Agriculture may have been, in part, a response to alcohol. This is the famous beer before bread debate. You don't think in those terms. You just know that the grass drink works better when you stay nearby. You can't wander far while it's fermenting. You need to check it, protect it, wait. And waiting in one place starts to feel less like stagnation and more like investment. The quirky detail that often gets overlooked. Early beer-like drinks were probably closer to porridge than anything you'd recognise as beer. Thick, chewy, full of nutrients. Alcoholic, yes, but also caloric. For people without refined food systems, this was a meal you could drink. That matters. Some scholars argue this made fermented grain drinks especially attractive during seasonal shortages. Stored grain could be turned into something safer to consume, easier to digest and mildly intoxicating. Others argue this overstates the efficiency and ignores how labour-intensive the process was. Both are right in parts. The work is real, so is the payoff. You begin clearing small patches of land, not to farm, not yet, but to encourage the grasses you like. You don't plant them systematically, you just favour them, protect them from trampling, return to them. This is proto-agriculture, emerging not from hunger alone, but from desire. Desire complicates everything. Staying put changes social dynamics. Old tensions that used to dissolve with distance now linger. Drinking helps. Shared intoxication becomes a pressure valve. Feasts grow larger. More people gather. The drink is central, not just consumed, but anticipated. Planning revolves around it. This is where critics of the beer before bread idea push back hard. They argue that no society would reorganise its entire subsistence strategy around a luxury. Food security, they say, must come first. Alcohol is indulgence. But that argument assumes a sharp divide between necessity and pleasure that your world doesn't recognise. The drink feeds you, it binds you, it motivates cooperation. It's not a luxury, it's a catalyst. The scholarly debate remains unresolved because the evidence cuts both ways. Some early settlements show signs of bread making before large-scale fermentation. Others show the reverse. The truth likely varies by region. But what's undeniable is that alcohol becomes a reason to stay, and staying changes you. You start building things you won't carry. Storage pits, windbreaks, eventually walls. The drink needs protection. So do the people waiting for it. Sedentism creeps in quietly, justified one fermentation cycle at a time. Alcohol changes scale here. No longer just a small group experience, it becomes a community event. More people, more drink, more coordination. Someone tracks quantities. Someone allocates portions. Someone decides timing. These roles harden. Organisation emerges. And with organisation comes inequality. Some people control more grain. Some control the process. Some control distribution. Alcohol amplifies this. Feasts become displays of power. Who can provide? Who can host? Who can afford excess? This is another uncomfortable historical insight. Alcohol likely accelerated social stratification. Not by itself, but as part of surplus culture. There's a fringe idea, still debated, that early leaders used alcohol deliberately to legitimize authority, hosting feasts to secure loyalty. Critics argue leadership predates alcohol-heavy societies. Supporters point to how consistently alcohol appears in early elite contexts, You don't see leaders yet, but you feel influence concentrating. The drink itself becomes more standardized. Techniques improve. The same process repeated yields similar results. Consistency builds trust. People expect the effect. That predictability makes alcohol more central, not less. Rituals form around production. Certain days, certain songs, certain gestures repeated because they feel right. Some of these actions have no chemical effect at all, but they matter. They mark time. They create anticipation. They turn waiting into meaning. You notice something else. Conflict increases too. Staying put brings resource disputes. Alcohol sometimes soothes them, sometimes inflames them. When it works, it's celebrated. When it fails, the consequences are serious. This duality fuels ongoing debate among scholars. Was alcohol a stabilizing or destabilizing force in early sedentary societies? The answer, infuriatingly, is yes. Your relationship with intoxication shifts again. It's no longer just about altering perception or bonding. It's about coordination, scheduling, production. Alcohol becomes embedded in economic life. Children grow up watching grain being processed not just into food, but into drink. They learn that some harvest is meant to be eaten, some transformed. This division matters. It teaches that value isn't inherent, it's created through process. That's a sophisticated idea. The drink also becomes safer than water in some contexts. Low-level alcohol kills pathogens. This is a modern scientific fact, but its effects would have been felt then. Some scholars argue fermented drinks reduced disease burden in early settlements. Others say concentrations were too low to matter consistently. The debate continues. Your body doesn't care about the debate. It cares that you get sick less often when you drink this instead of stagnant water. Time feels different now. Seasons are tracked more closely. Fermentation cycles become calendars. You think in weeks, not just days. This temporal expansion supports planning of all kinds, not just alcohol. You realise slowly that the drink has anchored you, not chained you, but tethered you. You move less because you want to see what happens next. You want to drink what you made. You want to gather when it's ready. Bread will come, eventually, grinding grain finer, baking it. But when it does, it won't replace the drink. It will join it. The two will evolve together, inseparable in practice, if not in debate. Scholars will argue for centuries about which came first, which mattered more, which drove which. From the inside, the question feels wrong. You didn't choose alcohol over food. You chose transformation over rawness, process over immediacy. Alcohol taught you to wait. Agriculture taught you to commit. And once you've committed to a place, a process, a future, it becomes very hard to go back to a life where everything you value has to be carried on your back. You take another sip of the thick, sour drink. It tastes like effort, like time, like staying. And for the first time, the idea of not moving on doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like the beginning of something built. The drink gets a name, not a word you'd recognise, not fixed or universal, but a sound that carries expectation. When it's spoken, people look toward the storage pits, toward the shaded corner where vessels rest, toward the future, measured in days until readiness. Naming matters. It turns a process into a thing into a concept, and concepts have gravity. You live closer together now, close enough to smell each other's meals, hear arguments through walls, notice who's drinking more than their share. Intoxication, once occasional and loose, is now woven into daily life, sometimes tightly, sometimes awkwardly. It's everywhere, and because it's everywhere, people start trying to control it. This is where rules begin to harden. Not laws carved into stone yet, but expectations that don't bend easily. Who can drink when? Who pours first? Who abstains during certain tasks? These rules don't come from nowhere. They're reactions, responses to injuries, fights, neglected duties. Alcohol forces structure because without it, the costs become impossible to ignore. Here's a historical fact often overshadowed by more glamorous debates. Early written laws, once writing appears, include regulations about alcohol almost immediately. Sumerian codes specify beer rations. Egyptian texts warn against excess. This suggests regulation didn't follow intoxication by much, it emerged alongside it. You're living in the pre-written version of that process. Someone drinks before work and does it poorly. They're reprimanded. Someone drinks during mourning and is comforted. Someone drinks alone and is watched. Alone drinking is new and unsettling. Intoxication was once communal by default. Now privacy exists. That changes everything. A scholarly debate circles this shift. Does alcohol become more dangerous as societies grow more complex? Some argue yes, more stress, more anonymity, more access. Others argue danger was always present, just less visible. You feel the tension firsthand. Alcohol amplifies whatever structure surrounds it. Strong bonds contain it. Weak ones let it spill. You start seeing alcohol used strategically, not just for bonding or celebration, but for management. Leaders, informal ones still, call for shared drinking before difficult decisions, before conflict mediation, before alliances are sealed. The drink doesn't decide outcomes, but it sets the tone, softens edges, sometimes dulls caution. This is where critics of alcohol's role get loud. They argue that intoxication undermines rational decision-making and invites manipulation. Supporters counter that rationality alone rarely sustains cooperation. Both are right. Alcohol doesn't create wisdom, it creates willingness. Whether that's good or bad depends on who's guiding the moment. Wine begins to emerge in some regions, fermented fruit refined, clarified, stronger. This takes more effort, better containers, better control. But it also introduces status. Wine isn't for everyone, it's reserved, shared selectively. Alcohol begins to stratify by type, not just quantity. A quirky detail archaeologists note: early wine residues often appear in elite or ceremonial contexts first. Beer remains the people's drink. This division will persist for millennia. You can already feel it forming. What you drink says something about who you are, or who you want to be. Medicinal use expands too. Alcohol becomes a solvent. Herbs soaked in it extract properties water can't. Pain dulls, wounds clean, sleep comes easier. Modern science confirms alcohol's antiseptic qualities, but its overuse masks symptoms and delays healing. You learn this the hard way. Some treatments help, some harm. Knowledge accumulates unevenly. This blurring of medicine and intoxication sparks debate even now among scholars. Was early drug use primarily therapeutic, with pleasure secondary? Or was pleasure primary, with healing discovered later? The archaeological record doesn't answer cleanly. From the inside, the distinction feels artificial. Relief is relief. Whether from pain or fear, it matters. Festivals grow more elaborate, timed to harvests, to celestial events, to collective memory. Alcohol anchors them. Without the drink, the gathering feels incomplete. With it, time stretches, emotion intensifies. Songs repeat until they feel ancient. Stories calcify into myth. You notice hangovers becoming common. Fatigue, irritability, slower mornings. This is new. Intoxication now has after effects that ripple into productivity. Some people begin abstaining strategically, not out of morality but efficiency. This introduces choice, and choice invites judgment. Moral language creeps in quietly, not good and evil yet, but appropriate and shameful. Drunkenness at the wrong time draws scorn. Sobriety at the wrong time draws suspicion. Balance becomes virtue. A scholarly debate tracks this closely. Did moral frameworks around intoxication emerge to protect social order or to enforce power structures? Likely both. Morality often does double duty. You feel its pressure without naming it. You know when eyes linger too long, when silence stretches, trade expands, alcohol travels, recipes move between groups, new flavours arrive, some stronger, some smoother. Intoxication becomes a point of cultural exchange. You can taste where someone's been. This matters. It signals connection, influence, sometimes dominance. Along these routes, new substances appear. Opium poppies, cannabis resin, chewed, smoked, infused. Alcohol becomes the baseline against which other highs are compared. Stronger substances are treated with caution or fascination, often both. There's a fringe idea, still controversial, that widespread alcohol use primed societies neurologically for more potent drugs later, normalizing altered states as acceptable experiences. Critics argue altered states existed long before alcohol. Supporters say alcohol habituated societies to managing them collectively. You can feel the plausibility. Alcohol taught you systems. Other drugs slot into them. You begin hearing complaints from elders that the youth drink too much, that things were simpler before. This is another historical constant. Moral panic about intoxication appears as soon as one generation thinks another is doing it wrong. The substance changes. The complaint doesn't. Brains adapt too. Reward pathways strengthen. Desire sharpens. This is a modern neurological fact, but its consequences would have been felt then. Pleasure becomes expected. Absence feels heavier. This is the shadow side of reliability. What was once special risks becoming necessary. Some people slip. Dependence deepens. They neglect fields. Relationships strain. The group intervenes, sometimes gently, sometimes harshly. There's no concept of addiction yet, but there is recognition that something has gone wrong. Solutions are inconsistent. Some work, some don't. Alcohol is no longer just something humans use. It's something humans manage. And management requires systems, rules, roles, meanings. These systems shape culture as much as any tool or weapon. Intoxication becomes a lens through which societies define responsibility, pleasure, control. You sit with a cup in your hands, watching a festival unfold that would have been unthinkable generations ago. Music, dance, laughter layered over labour and planning. This is not chaos. It's structured release. You think back to fermented berries in a forgotten pouch, to accidents, to warmth discovered by chance. The distance between then and now is measured not just in time, but in intention. You didn't just learn how to get drunk, you learned how to build a world where getting drunk has meaning and consequences, and that world is only getting more complicated. You can taste the difference now, not just between drinks, but between people. Who gets what, how often, and why. Alcohol has slipped quietly into the architecture of status, and once it's there, it doesn't leave easily. Some drinks take more work, better fruit, cleaner vessels, more time guarded from contamination. These drinks don't circulate freely. They're poured deliberately, offered selectively. When you see one, you know it's not meant for everyone. Wine, in particular, begins to signal something beyond intoxication. It says surplus, control, refinement. This is a historical fact that shows up clearly once written records appear. In early complex societies, wine is often associated with elites, while beer remains the staple of labourers. But the pattern starts earlier, long before writing. You feel it in who hosts the feasts, who controls storage, who decides when a special drink is opened. Alcohol becomes a language of hierarchy. A quirky but revealing detail archaeologists note is that elite drinking vessels often appear in graves, while everyday containers do not. Cups carved from stone, decorated jars, ornate straws, these aren't practical, they're symbolic. They say, even in death, this person drank differently. That symbolism doesn't come from nowhere. It's learned here, in moments like this. You notice how posture changes when certain drinks are served. People sit up straighter, voices soften, conversation turns careful. The drink itself hasn't changed chemically, but its meaning has. Anthropologists call this conspicuous consumption. You don't have the term, but you understand the effect. Drinking becomes performance. A scholarly debate runs parallel to this development. Did alcohol drive inequality, or did inequality shape alcohol use? Some argue that once surplus exists, elites naturally claim the most refined intoxicants. Others argue that control over intoxicants helped create elites in the first place. The archaeological record supports both interpretations in different contexts. Standing here, watching access narrow, it feels like a feedback loop more than a single cause. Alcohol also becomes a tool of obligation. You accept a drink, you accept a relationship, a favour owed, a loyalty implied. Refusing can be read as insult or defiance. This social pressure is subtle but powerful. It binds people upward as much as outward. You begin to see labour tied directly to drink. Workers are promised rations. Extra effort earns extra pause. This isn't just reward, it's motivation. Early texts will later formalise this, but the practice predates them. Alcohol becomes part of the economic contract. There's danger here. People work longer, harder, chasing both the drink and the approval attached to it. Fatigue sets in. Injuries rise. Some scholars argue alcohol masked exploitation by dulling awareness of hardship. Others argue it was a genuine compensation, valued in its own right. From inside the system, the line blurs. Relief and manipulation feel similar when you're exhausted. Gender enters the picture more sharply now. Who is allowed to drink publicly? Who serves? Who abstains? These rules vary wildly by culture, but the pattern of regulation is consistent. Alcohol becomes a site where gender roles are enforced and displayed. Some women brew but don't drink. Some drink only in private. Some cultures reverse this entirely. The variability fuels ongoing debate about whether alcohol inherently reinforces hierarchy or simply reflects existing ones. You see power being negotiated cup by cup. Medicinal use continues alongside status use, but the two begin to diverge. Healing brews are plain, functional. Status drinks are refined, flavoured, aged. This separation matters. It distinguishes necessity from luxury, even when both alter the mind. The body learns to crave the latter more than the former. Trade networks expand further. Wine travels farther than beer because it keeps better. That portability gives it influence. Wherever it goes, it carries prestige with it. Some scholars argue wine helped spread elite culture across regions, standardizing tastes and practices. Others argue it merely followed existing power routes. Either way, alcohol becomes a vector of cultural transmission. You hear new stories now, not just of ancestors and animals, but of feasts that went too far, of leaders who drank themselves into ruin. These cautionary tales serve a purpose. They define limits by example. Alcohol inspires myth on both sides of the line, glory and downfall. Addiction's shadow lengthens. You see people who can't stop, not just socially, but physically. They shake. They grow irritable when drink is scarce. This is another historical reality often sanitized. Dependence is not a modern invention. It appears wherever alcohol becomes reliable and abundant. What changes over time is how societies interpret it. Some see it as weakness, some as illness, some as moral failure, some as misfortune. Responses vary: banishment, restriction, ritual cleansing, forced abstinence. None are fully effective. The problem resists simple solutions. A scholarly debate here asks whether ancient societies recognized addiction as distinct from moral failing. The evidence is mixed. Texts often condemn excess without diagnosing it. But social practices, intervention, care, restriction, suggest recognition of a problem beyond simple choice. You don't label it. You just know when someone is slipping. Despite all this, alcohol's role doesn't shrink. It expands. Feasts grow larger, ceremonies more elaborate, The drink marks births, deaths, victories, treaties. It becomes temporal glue, anchoring life events in shared memory. You remember not just what happened, but what was poured. Status hardens. Generations grow up expecting certain drinks at certain moments. What was once innovation becomes tradition. Tradition resists change. This is how alcohol-use patterns fossilize culturally. You see resentment build too. Those excluded notice. Those limited pushback. Alcohol becomes a site of quiet rebellion. Drinking alone, drinking secretly, drinking the wrong thing at the wrong time. Rules provoke resistance by existing. A fringe idea debated among scholars suggests that intoxication offered a rare space for sanctioned disobedience, a way to invert hierarchy temporarily. Festivals where servants drank like masters, moments when status blurred. Critics argue these inversions ultimately reinforced hierarchy by containing rebellion within ritual. Supporters argue they provided real psychological release. You experience both sides. The night feels free. Morning restores order. Your brain adapts again. Reward expectations grow sharper. Alcohol is no longer surprising. It's anticipated. Dopamine fires earlier, at the promise rather than the sip. This is a modern neurological insight, but its behavioural consequences would have been felt. Cravings shaped by routine, not chemistry alone. Some people begin seeking stronger experiences. Wine isn't enough. Beer feels dull. They look to other substances. Resins, brews, infusions. Alcohol becomes the baseline altered state, not the peak. This sets the stage for escalation. Elders shake their heads. Youth roll their eyes. This tension feels timeless because it is. Every generation believes the next is getting intoxication wrong. The substance matters less than the anxiety about control. You sit at a feast, watching a leader raise a decorated cup. The crowd quiets. The gesture means something now. It signals authority, generosity, access. When the cup passes, not everyone drinks equally. Some sip, some wait, some aren't offered at all. This moment contains a truth that will echo across history. Intoxicants don't just alter minds. They organise societies. They reveal who matters, who decides, who belongs. You think back, dimly, to honey water, forgotten in a tree hollow, to laughter without rank, to warmth without meaning layered on top. That world feels distant, not lost exactly, but transformed beyond recognition. Alcohol didn't create hierarchy, but once hierarchy appeared, alcohol learned how to serve it, and it will continue to do so, adaptable, seductive, deeply human, long after the people in this room are dust. You take your drink carefully, aware now that every sip carries more than chemistry. It carries structure, expectation, power, and once you taste that, it's very hard to pretend intoxication is ever just about getting drunk. Relief becomes respectable. That's the quiet shift you notice next. The way intoxication slides comfortably into the language of care. Not celebration, not power, care. When someone is hurt, grieving, feverish, or simply worn thin by work, the drink appears without ceremony. It's offered the way a blanket is offered. No speeches, no status games, just relief. Alcohol settles into medicine almost naturally. This is a historical fact supported by written records once they appear, but the practice clearly predates writing. Alcohol is one of humanity's earliest analgesics, sedatives, and antiseptics. It dulls pain, it calms nerves, it disinfects wounds, it helps people sleep when sleep won't come on its own. You don't know the mechanisms, but you know the outcomes. A cut cleaned with drink festers less. A restless night eases faster. Herbs follow alcohol into this role. Soaked leaves, roots crushed and steeped, resins dissolved. Alcohol becomes a carrier, a way to pull something out of a plant and into the body more effectively than water alone. Modern pharmacology confirms this. Ethanol is an excellent solvent, but here it's discovered through feel, not theory. You start associating certain taste with relief, bitter for pain, sweet-sour for exhaustion, sharp for fever. These associations matter. They turn sensation into expectation, expectation into comfort. Here's a quirky but revealing detail. Many early medicinal brews were intentionally unpleasant. Bitter, numbing, even nauseating. This likely served a dual purpose, extracting active compounds and discouraging casual use. Some scholars argue that bad taste was an early form of regulation. If something tasted awful, you only used it when you really needed it. Pleasure and medicine stayed separate, at least for a while. But separation never holds perfectly. Someone discovers that a medicinal dose also brings warmth, calm, even mild euphoria. They start using it for stress rather than sickness. This is where the line blurs. Healing slides toward habit. Habit slides toward dependence. The group notices, but doesn't fully know how to respond. A scholarly debate lives here. Did early societies distinguish clearly between medicine and intoxication? Or is that a modern categorization imposed backward? Some argue ancient healing was holistic, body, mind, spirit intertwined, and altered states were part of treatment by default. Others argue that functional use existed first, with pleasure creeping in later. From where you stand, the boundary feels fuzzy and shifting, not fixed. Pain management becomes especially important as lives grow more physically demanding. Repetitive labour damages joints, injuries accumulate. Without modern surgery or anaesthesia, alcohol fills the gap. It doesn't heal, but it makes survival tolerable. This matters. It keeps people working, living, functioning. There's an uncomfortable implication here, one scholars argue about openly. Did alcohol enable harsher labour systems by masking pain? Some argue yes. Intoxication allowed societies to push bodies further than they otherwise could. Others argue the alternative wasn't gentler labour, but death. Alcohol wasn't a tool of exploitation so much as a coping mechanism within unavoidable hardship. Both interpretations carry weight. You see midwives use drink to calm labouring women. You see elders given alcohol at night to ease breathing and fear. You see the dying offered it not as cure but as mercy. These moments anchor alcohol emotionally in care, not excess. That association runs deep. Language reflects it. Words for drink blend with words for comfort, for easing, for forgetting pain. This linguistic overlap shapes perception. Alcohol isn't framed as indulgence, it's framed as help. Other substances share this space. Opium-like resins dull pain more effectively. Certain mushrooms reduce inflammation. Cannabis eases nausea. The medicinal toolkit expands. Alcohol becomes the base layer, the common denominator. Stronger substances are added cautiously, often under supervision. Here's a fringe idea that still sparks debate. Some researchers suggest early medical use of intoxicants trained humans to observe internal states more closely. Pain levels, mood shifts, bodily signals, laying groundwork for later diagnostic thinking. Critics argue that introspection doesn't require drugs. Supporters counter that altered states exaggerate sensation, making patterns easier to notice. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. Healing rituals grow around these practices, not because healing requires ceremony, but because ceremony organizes attention. It signals seriousness. It reassures. Alcohol plays well with ritual. It relaxes, focuses, reduces fear. A patient who believes in the treatment responds differently. Modern placebo research confirms belief matters. You feel it intuitively. Failures happen. Someone drinks too much while sick and worsens dehydration. Someone relies on drink instead of rest and collapses. These failures become lessons. Dosage matters. Timing matters. Context matters. Medical knowledge advances unevenly, paid for in mistakes. Over time, healers differentiate themselves further. Some specialize in herbs, some in bones, some in spirits and visions. Alcohol touches all of them. It becomes a bridge between physical and non-physical explanations of illness. Pain is not just in the body, it's in the story you tell about it. A scholarly debate asks whether early medicine was primarily pharmacological or symbolic. The evidence suggests it was inseparable. Alcohol exemplifies this perfectly. It has real physiological effects and powerful symbolic ones. Relief comes from both. You notice that people forgive excess more easily when it's framed as medicine. A drink taken for pain carries less judgment than one taken for pleasure. This moral distinction will echo for centuries. It allows societies to condemn intoxication while relying on it quietly. The downside appears slowly. People begin self-medicating emotional pain, loss, anxiety, fear of the future. Alcohol works, for a while, then it stops working as well. Dosage increases, the relief shortens. This cycle is ancient. You see it forming long before anyone names it. Some cultures respond by restricting medicinal use to specialists. Others allow household remedies freely. Outcomes vary. Where access is controlled, abuse lessens but resentment grows. Where access is open, relief spreads, and so does dependence. There is no perfect system. Trade amplifies this dynamic. Stronger medicinal brews travel. Knowledge spreads unevenly. Some groups gain access to potent substances without the cultural frameworks to manage them. Problems spike. Elders blame outsiders. Outsiders blame misuse. Alcohol is rarely blamed directly. It's too embedded. You also notice that medicinal intoxication changes how people view suffering. Pain becomes something to be treated, not endured silently. This is a significant cultural shift. It reshapes expectations of care, of community responsibility. Someone in pain is no longer just unfortunate, they are someone who should be helped. That expectation binds groups tighter. It also raises stakes. Failure to provide relief becomes moral failure. Alcohol, cheap and effective, fills the gap again and again. Children grow up seeing drink offered in moments of vulnerability. This imprints deeply. Alcohol becomes associated not just with joy or power, but with being held together when things fall apart. That association is incredibly strong and incredibly difficult to undo later. Scholars debate whether this emotional embedding is why alcohol proves so resilient across cultures, surviving religious bans, moral crusades, and repeated social harm. Other intoxicants come and go. Alcohol stays. It's too useful, too versatile, too woven into care. You sit beside someone injured, holding a cup to their lips. They grimace, then relax. Their breathing slows, their grip on your arm loosens. In this moment, alcohol is not dangerous. It is kind. You know it can be both. You've seen it. But humans rarely abandon a tool that helps in their worst moments. They adapt around it, justify it, regulate it, argue about it endlessly. Alcohol becomes medicine not because it is perfect, but because it is available. Because it works enough. Because it fits into the spaces between what you can fix and what you can't. And once intoxication learns how to soothe pain, not just celebrate or dominate, it earns a place that's almost impossible to remove. You take a careful sip yourself, not for joy, not for status, but because your body aches, and tomorrow will demand more from you. The relief is real, so are the consequences, and you understand now that the story of humans getting drunk and high was never just about pleasure. It was about learning how to survive pain, physical and otherwise, using whatever chemistry the world was willing to give you. Limits arrive quietly, wearing the face of necessity. You don't wake up one day and decide intoxication needs boundaries. Boundaries are forced on you, by accidents, by neglect, by moments when relief tips into ruin. Someone drinks when they shouldn't and fails a watch. Someone drinks too much and falls into a fire. Someone trades tomorrow's grain for tonight's numbness and leaves children hungry. These moments accumulate. Memory hardens into rule. Rules begin as stories. Remember what happened when is enough at first. Shame does most of the work. Laughter too, sharp and corrective. But as the group grows larger and less intimate, memory alone can't hold the line. People don't all share the same experiences anymore. Intoxication spreads faster than caution, so limits become explicit. Not universal bans, those never last, but conditions. Times, places, people. Alcohol after work, not before. Alcohol at festivals, not funerals, unless grief demands it. Alcohol shared, not hoarded. These distinctions vary wildly between cultures, but the impulse behind them is consistent. Intoxication needs context, or it destabilizes everything around it. This is a historical pattern scholars recognize clearly once laws appear. Regulation follows widespread use almost immediately. Sumerian tablets specify beer rations. Egyptian wisdom texts warn against drunkenness. Chinese rituals limit wine to formal occasions. These aren't moral manifestos, they're damage control. You feel that same instinct now. There's a scholarly debate about whether early taboos around intoxication were primarily about safety or social control. Some argue restrictions protected productivity and cohesion. Others argue elites used morality to regulate access and behaviour. Both forces are present. Regulation rarely serves only one purpose. Taboos take many forms. Some are practical. Don't drink before hunting. Some are symbolic. Don't drink during certain rites. Some are personal. Certain people abstain entirely, marking themselves as different. Abstinence itself becomes meaningful, not superior, but notable. You see abstainers treated with a mix of respect and suspicion. They're reliable, clear-headed, but also outside the shared vulnerability intoxication creates. Trust flows differently around them. This tension between sobriety as virtue and intoxication as bonding will never fully resolve. Gendered taboos sharpen. In some groups, women are restricted from drinking publicly. In others, men are. In still others, age determines access. These rules don't arise from chemistry. They arise from anxiety about reproduction, lineage, labour, control. Alcohol becomes a proxy battleground for deeper social fears. A quirky detail anthropologists note is how often alcohol taboos are inconsistent. The same society may condemn drunkenness in one context and celebrate it in another. This inconsistency isn't hypocrisy, it's functionality. Rules adapt to circumstance. Intoxication is too useful to ban entirely, too dangerous to leave unmanaged. Punishment emerges alongside taboo, not always severe. Sometimes exclusion is enough, being left out of the next gathering, the next pour. In small groups this hurts. Belonging matters. Alcohol, once glue, now becomes leverage. You also see ritual abstinence appear. Before certain events, hunts, journeys, initiations, people refrain deliberately. This abstinence heightens anticipation. When drinking resumes, it feels earned. Some scholars argue this cycling between restraint and release intensifies alcohol's social impact. Others argue it simply mirrors natural scarcity. Either way, pattern matters. Children absorb these limits early. They learn not just how to drink, but when not to. They learn that intoxication is not a right, it's conditional. This framing shapes expectations profoundly. Alcohol is not neutral, it's permission-based. A scholarly debate focuses on whether such taboos actually reduce harm. Modern evidence suggests partial success at best. Restrictions reduce certain risks, but often push behaviour underground. You see that too. People drink secretly. They brew stronger, faster drinks to avoid detection. Regulation shapes behaviour, but not always as intended. This leads to innovation. Stronger substances appear in hidden corners. Concentrated brews, infusions. Alcohol evolves in response to control. This cat-and-mouse dynamic is ancient. Whenever limits tighten, chemistry adapts. Humans are inventive when desire meets restriction. Moral language hardens around intoxication. Words like excess, shame, loss of face, gain weight. These words don't describe alcohol itself. They describe failure to meet expectation. Intoxication becomes a test of character. Can you handle it? Can you stop? Can you remain useful? This moral framing is contentious even among scholars. Some argue it helped societies function by encouraging moderation. Others argue it stigmatized dependence and obscured structural causes of harm. From inside the system, morality feels blunt but necessary. There are no therapists, no rehab, only norms. You notice that people who repeatedly violate taboos are treated differently. Trust erodes. Responsibilities are withheld. In extreme cases, people are pushed out entirely. Exile is rare, but it happens. Alcohol doesn't cause the exile alone. It reveals something the group decides it can't carry. At the same time, forgiveness exists. Apologies are accepted. Limits are reset. Alcohol-fueled mistakes are sometimes understood as human, not malicious. This balance between accountability and mercy is fragile. Groups that lean too far either way fracture. There's a fringe idea among scholars that early taboos around intoxication helped humans develop impulse control more broadly. Learning when not to drink trained the same cognitive muscles needed for delayed gratification in other areas: food storage, cooperation, planning. Critics argue impulse control evolved independently. Supporters point to how often alcohol becomes a training ground for self-regulation. The idea is tempting. You feel the effort it takes to stop after one cup. That effort is real. It's practiced. It becomes part of adulthood. Children watch who can do it and who can't. Reputations form. Alcohol also becomes a marker of transition. First drink. First time allowed at a feast. These moments are remembered vividly. They signal entry into responsibility as much as pleasure. Initiation rituals incorporate intoxication carefully, framed by instruction and oversight. Not because intoxication makes you adult, but because handling it proves something about you. Some cultures swing toward restriction, others toward permissiveness. Outcomes vary. There is no perfect balance. Every system produces its own failures, but the attempt to regulate never disappears. Intoxication is too powerful to ignore. You sit with elders as they debate whether the rules should change. They argue from memory, from fear, from hope. Alcohol is central to the discussion, but it's never really about alcohol. It's about who you're becoming as a group. Trade introduces new challenges. Outsiders bring unfamiliar drinks, unfamiliar strengths. Existing rules don't always apply. People misjudge. Harm spikes. This fuels xenophobia. Blame. Alcohol becomes entangled with identity. Ours versus theirs. Some drinks are embraced, others banned. Not for safety alone, but for cultural preservation. A scholarly debate tracks this closely. How much of alcohol regulation is about health, and how much about identity? Evidence suggests identity plays a huge role. What you drink signals who you are. What you forbid signals who you are not. Despite all this, intoxication remains deeply desired. Limits don't kill desire, they frame it. The anticipation of sanctioned drinking grows sharper when abstinence is enforced. This makes festivals more intense, more meaningful. Release feels earned. You understand now that intoxication and restraint evolve together. One provokes the other. Neither ever wins completely. The idea that humans were once innocent about getting drunk or high fades. Innocence doesn't survive experience this long. What replaces it is negotiation. Constant, imperfect negotiation between chemistry and culture. You lift a cup under the watchful eyes of those around you. You know the rules, you know the risks, you know when to stop, most of the time. That knowledge doesn't make intoxication safe, but it makes it survivable. And survival, as always, is the quiet standard by which human behaviours endure. When limits tighten, release becomes scheduled. That's the pattern you begin to recognise. Intoxication doesn't disappear under rules. It concentrates. Pushed out of daily life, It re-emerges at specific moments, heavier and brighter than before. Festivals form not because people suddenly love calendars, but because desire needs permission, and permission works best when it's predictable. You feel the shift as the year gains shape. Certain times hum with anticipation, harvest complete, debt settled, the long dark approaching. These are moments when restraint loosens by design. Alcohol flows freely, sometimes dangerously so, but within a frame everyone understands. This is when excess is allowed. This is ritual ecstasy. Historically, this pattern is unmistakable. Once societies regulate intoxication, they almost always create sanctioned periods of collective excess. Ancient festivals across cultures, harvest feasts, solstice rites, victory celebrations, are drenched in alcohol and often other intoxicants. This isn't coincidence. It's pressure release. You don't need scholars to tell you that. You can feel it in the air when the first vessel is opened. Weeks of restraint collapse into noise, movement, colour. The drink tastes stronger because you've waited. The effect hits harder because your body has reset. Here's a quirky detail historians love. Many early festivals deliberately reversed social roles. Servants mocked masters. Youth taunted elders. Rules bent or inverted. Alcohol made this possible. Not because it erased hierarchy permanently, but because it made temporary inversion feel safe. The next day, order returned, often reinforced by contrast. A scholarly debate circles this phenomenon. Some argue these festivals functioned as social safety valves, preventing rebellion by offering controlled release. Others argue they were genuinely transformative, allowing societies to renegotiate norms and values. The evidence supports both interpretations. Sometimes festivals reinforce power, sometimes they destabilize it. That unpredictability is part of their charge. Music changes during these moments. Rhythm dominates. Drums, clapping, feet on ground. Alcohol amplifies synchronization. Bodies move together more easily. Neuroscience now confirms this. Intoxication reduces self-monitoring and enhances group coordination, but you experience it as something simpler. You move because everyone else is moving. Dance becomes central. Not performance, but participation. The boundary between watcher and actor dissolves. This is important. Shared movement deepens bonding in ways conversation can't. Alcohol makes surrendering to rhythm easier. Exhaustion arrives, but it's welcomed. Other substances join in. Smoke thickens. Bitter brews circulate quietly among those seeking something deeper than joy. Visions, communion, forgetting. These are not casual additions. They are timed, layered, guided. The shaman's role becomes especially visible now, helping people navigate states that edge toward overwhelm. A historical fact often overlooked. Many early ecstatic rituals combined multiple intoxicants: alcohol plus smoke, alcohol plus fasting, alcohol plus chanting. The goal wasn't simple pleasure, it was transcendence through intensity. You don't get there gently. This is where scholars argue most fiercely. Did ritual ecstasy strengthen communities or endanger them? Some point to injuries, deaths, excess. Others point to cohesion, meaning resilience. The answer depends on frequency, scale, and context. Too often, and the group fractures. Too rarely, and pressure builds until something snaps. You notice how children are included, at the edges, watching, mimicking dance, tasting diluted drink. They're not shielded entirely, but they're not thrown into the centre either. This graded exposure matters. It teaches that ecstasy is powerful but not casual. It has stages. Masks appear in some places. Paint. Costumes made of leaves and bone. Alcohol makes wearing them feel transformative rather than silly. Identity loosens. You're not just yourself tonight. You are role, animal, ancestor, force. This temporary dissolution of self can be terrifying, or liberating. A fringe theory debated among anthropologists suggests that such experiences trained humans to tolerate ego loss, making cooperation at larger scales possible. Critics argue cooperation doesn't require ego dissolution. Supporters counter that surrendering individuality, even briefly, strengthens group identity. Standing in the crush of bodies, breath and sweat and rhythm, you understand the appeal. The festival has rules too, even if they feel invisible. Violence beyond a point is not tolerated. Certain spaces are protected. Certain people intervene if things tip too far. Ecstasy is not chaos. It's managed intensity. That management is learned through hard lessons. Stories emerge from these nights, not accurate ones, charged ones, exaggerated, mythic. Someone claims they danced until sunrise without stopping. Someone else insists the ground moved. These stories aren't corrected. Precision doesn't matter. Emotional truth does. The festival lives on in retelling. Alcohol's role here is foundational. It widens the doorway, it lowers resistance, it invites participation. Other substances may deepen or redirect the experience, but alcohol brings everyone to the threshold together. That's its unique power. You feel emptied afterward, sore, hoarse, but also lighter. Problems that felt heavy before now feel distant, or at least shared. This afterglow is temporary, but it matters. It resets perspective. It makes returning to routine bearable. Scholars debate whether such ecstatic rituals contributed to mental health resilience in early societies. Some argue they provided catharsis, reducing long-term stress. Others argue they introduced volatility. The truth likely varies. But the persistence of festivals across cultures suggests they solved more problems than they created. Not everyone loves them. Some avoid the chaos. Some fear loss of control. These people aren't wrong. Ecstasy isn't for everyone, but even those who abstain benefit indirectly. Tension dissipates. The group returns calmer, bonded by something shared, even if not fully experienced by all. The calendar fills with meaning now. Ordinary days exist to support extraordinary ones. Alcohol is rationed in anticipation. Storage pits are guarded more carefully. Scarcity sharpens excitement. Abundance is planned. Trade adapts too. Certain intoxicants are reserved for festivals. Their arrival is celebrated. This increases long-distance exchange. People travel to attend. Festivals become nodes of connection, spreading songs, styles, ideas, and substances. A scholarly debate follows this closely. Did festivals accelerate cultural diffusion? Evidence suggests yes. Wherever people gather in large numbers under reduced inhibition, ideas spread quickly. Alcohol doesn't just loosen tongues, it loosens traditions. You watch strangers become familiar in a single night. Friendships form, alliances spark, romantic bonds ignite. Not all last, some end badly, but enough endure to matter. Festivals are chaotic engines of social change. There's risk here too. Excess leads to injury, to regret, to pregnancies that complicate lineage. Elders mutter afterward. New rules are proposed. Next time, maybe limits will tighten again. The pendulum swings. That swing between restraint and release becomes the rhythm of culture itself. Alcohol sits at the centre, timing the beat. You sit near the fire as dawn creeps in, cup empty, body spent. Around you, people sleep in tangled heaps. Someone laughs softly in their dreams. The world feels reset, scrubbed raw. You know this feeling won't last. Hunger will return. Conflicts will resurface. Rules will reassert themselves. But something has been reaffirmed. You belong. You are part of something larger than yourself. That's the gift ritual ecstasy offers, at its best. Not escape, not oblivion, but reconnection, through intensity, through surrender, through shared intoxication that burns hot and fades cleanly. Alcohol didn't invent this need. Humans carried it long before fermentation. But alcohol learned how to meet it. And once it did, societies began building time itself around the moments when getting drunk wasn't just allowed, but expected. You rise slowly, aching, satisfied. The festival is over, The memory will carry you until the next one. You begin to notice who is allowed to let go. Not everyone dances the same way. Not everyone drinks the same amount. Not everyone is forgiven afterward. Intoxication may feel universal in the moment, but its consequences are not evenly distributed. Power, gender, age, all of it shapes who gets to be altered without paying too high a price. Alcohol exposes this more clearly than anything else. In some gatherings, men drink openly, loudly, praised for endurance. Women drink quietly or not at all, praised for restraint. In others, women brew and serve but are judged harshly if they indulge. In still others, intoxicated women are expected until they cross an invisible line. The rules are inconsistent, but the scrutiny is constant. This isn't chemistry, it's control. A historical fact scholars recognize across early societies is that alcohol regulation often intersects sharply with gender norms. Who drinks, who serves, who abstains, who is punished. These patterns vary, but they appear everywhere alcohol becomes embedded in social life. Intoxication becomes a stage on which acceptable behavior is performed and enforced. You watch the differences play out in real time. A drunk man is laughed at. A drunk woman is watched. A drunk elder is indulged. A drunk youth is corrected. Same substance, same dose, different meaning. A scholarly debate circles this dynamic. Did alcohol reinforce existing gender hierarchies, or did it create new ones? Some argue intoxicants simply mirrored social structure. Others argue that because alcohol magnifies vulnerability, societies became anxious about who was allowed to be vulnerable publicly. That anxiety often landed hardest on women, whose bodies and behaviour were already politicised. From where you stand, the second explanation feels painfully plausible. Power uses intoxication as a test. Can you drink without embarrassing the group? Can you stop when expected? Can you maintain dignity while altered? Those who pass gain trust. Those who fail are limited. This applies across genders, but the margin for error is not equal. Age complicates this further. Elders drink and are excused. Their mistakes are stories, not scandals. Youth are watched closely. Intoxication becomes a proving ground. Handle it well, and you're treated as capable. Handle it poorly, and your status drops. Alcohol becomes a rite of passage, whether formally acknowledged or not. Here's a quirky but telling detail. Anthropologists note, many cultures mark adulthood not by the first drink, but by the first time one is trusted to pour for others. This shift, from consumer to distributor, signals responsibility. Alcohol becomes a medium through which power is exercised, not just enjoyed. Women often control brewing. This gives them quiet influence. They decide strength, timing, availability. Some scholars argue this granted women significant social leverage in early societies. Others counter that control over production did not equal control over consumption or norms. Both are true. Influence doesn't always translate into authority. You see subtle negotiations. A brew made weaker this time. A festival delayed. A vessel emptied sooner than expected. These decisions shape outcomes. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it ferments quietly. Sexual dynamics sharpen under intoxication. Alcohol lowers inhibition, increases desire, blurs consent. This is a modern concern, but its roots are ancient. Societies respond by layering rules onto intoxication. Who can approach whom, when, under what conditions? These rules are imperfect and often unjust, but they emerge from real risk. A scholarly debate wrestles with this uncomfortably. Did alcohol increase sexual violence in early societies, or did ritual frameworks mitigate it? The evidence is fragmentary, but patterns suggest both occurred. Where intoxication was structured and supervised, harm was reduced. Where it was chaotic, harm increased. Alcohol magnifies intent, it doesn't create it. Marriage customs absorb intoxication too. Drinking marks unions, seals alliances, sometimes tests them. A spouse who can't handle drink is judged, not just personally, but as a liability to the group. Alcohol becomes part of marital reputation. You notice that intoxication is also used to enforce gender boundaries. Certain drinks are labelled men's or women's. Certain strengths are deemed appropriate. These distinctions have no chemical basis. They are symbolic. Drinking becomes identity performance. A fringe idea debated among scholars suggests that alcohol offered women rare sanctioned spaces of release in otherwise restrictive societies, festivals where norms loosened just enough to breathe. Critics argue these moments were illusory freedoms, contained and temporary. Standing here, you can see both sides. The night feels free. Morning restores limits. Children absorb these patterns early. They learn not just how to drink, but how their gender should drink. This shapes expectation long before choice is available. Alcohol becomes one more script to follow, or resist. Resistance appears quietly. Someone drinks when they're not supposed to. Someone refuses when expected. These acts are noticed, sometimes punished, sometimes admired. Alcohol becomes a medium of defiance as much as conformity. Power struggles play out cup by cup. Who pours, who refuses, who is offered first. These gestures matter. They communicate rank more efficiently than words. Anthropologists note that in many societies, alcohol service order mirrors political hierarchy. You feel that truth viscerally when your cup stays empty a little too long. Shamans and ritual leaders often exist outside these gendered norms. Their intoxication is interpreted differently. Vision excuses behaviour that would be unacceptable otherwise. This exemption grants power, but also isolates. They belong everywhere and nowhere at once. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether such roles allowed individuals, especially women or gender non-conforming people, to step outside rigid categories. Some evidence suggests yes. Others argue these exceptions reinforce norms by labelling difference as sacred rather than normal. The ambiguity persists. You see intoxication used as justification after the fact. The drink made me do it. Sometimes this explanation is accepted, sometimes not. Acceptance often aligns with status. Alcohol becomes an alibi unequally distributed. Despite all this, intoxication continues to draw people in. Not because it's fair, but because it's powerful. It reveals fault lines already present. It doesn't create inequality, but it exposes it starkly. Some people begin to avoid drinking in public altogether. Not out of restraint, but self-protection. Privacy becomes a refuge. Drinking alone or in trusted circles feels safer. This shifts patterns again. Public intoxication declines. Private intoxication rises. Regulation adapts slowly, always behind behaviour. A scholarly debate tracks this shift. Does privatization of intoxication reduce harm or increase isolation? The evidence is mixed. Reduced public disorder comes at the cost of weaker communal oversight. You can feel that trade-off forming. Alcohol's role in power becomes undeniable now. It's not just a substance, it's a social amplifier. It makes status visible. It makes norms loud. It makes mistakes memorable. You sit back and watch who relaxes fully and who never quite does, who laughs without fear and who keeps one eye on the crowd. Intoxication promises equality in chemistry, but society never delivers it, and yet people keep drinking together, because even uneven vulnerability feels better than isolation, because even flawed release feels better than constant restraint. Because alcohol, for all its injustices, still offers moments when roles blur just enough to imagine something else. You lift your cup, aware now that how you drink will be read, remembered, judged. You drink anyway, not recklessly, not defiantly, but consciously. You understand now that intoxication is never neutral. It's a mirror, and like all mirrors, it shows you not just yourself, but the structure standing behind you, shaping what you're allowed to see. At first, no one wants to name it. It's easier to talk about excess, about weakness, about bad character. It's easier to tell stories about cautionary figures than to admit a pattern is forming. But over time you begin to recognise the shape of something that doesn't fit neatly into moral language. Some people don't just enjoy intoxication, they need it, and need behaves differently than desire. You see it in the mornings, shaking hands, irritability before the first drink, the way relief comes too fast, too completely, and then fades into something worse than before. This isn't celebration, it's maintenance. Here's the historical fact that unsettles modern assumptions. Dependence on intoxicants is not a product of industrialization. Wherever alcohol becomes abundant, reliable, and culturally embedded, patterns of addiction appear. Archaeological evidence can't diagnose individuals, but written records, once they emerge, describe behaviours unmistakably familiar. Craving, loss of control, social harm, the vocabulary changes, the phenomenon doesn't. In your world there's no word for addiction, but there is recognition. People notice who drinks first and who drinks last, who plans around access, who becomes anxious when supply is threatened. These signals don't go unseen. They're discussed quietly, rarely confronted directly. Shame is a blunt tool, and everyone knows it can make things worse. A scholarly debate asks whether early societies understood addiction as illness or moral failure. The answer seems to be both, inconsistently. Excess is condemned, but persistent excess, especially when paired with visible suffering, often elicits care as well as judgment. The response depends on the person's role, history, and usefulness to the group. You see accommodation happen, tasks reassigned, drinking shifted to later in the day, someone always making sure that person eats. This isn't compassion in the modern therapeutic sense, it's pragmatic mercy. Keeping someone functional is better than losing them entirely, but accommodation has limits. When someone's drinking begins to endanger others, neglecting children, missing watches, provoking fights, the group intervenes more forcefully. Access is restricted. Drinking companions are changed. In extreme cases, the person is sent away temporarily, to kin or allied groups. This is not punishment alone, it's distance, sometimes the only tool available. There's a fringe idea among historians that early forms of exile may have functioned as crude detoxification, forced abstinence through separation. Critics argue this is speculative. Supporters point to repeated patterns of temporary banishment followed by conditional return. You can feel the intention even if the theory is modern. Get space between the person and the substance and see what survives. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You also notice something else troubling. As intoxication becomes more central to social life, abstainers begin to cluster, not just by choice, but by necessity. Those who can't handle drink gravitate toward each other. They form quieter networks. This reduces harm for them, but it also isolates them from power, from festivals, from influence. Sobriety becomes safe, but marginal. Alcohol reshapes social geography. There's a tension scholars still wrestle with. Does widespread intoxication increase overall happiness while harming a minority? Or does it create diffuse harm that's simply harder to see? From inside the system, it's hard to measure. Laughter is loud. Suffering is quiet. You notice how stories about addiction evolve. Early on, they're personal. So-and-so drank too much and lost everything. Over time, they become archetypal. The drunkard, the wastrel. These figures serve a purpose. They externalize fear. They allow the group to say, "That won't be me," even when the line between use and need is thinner than anyone admits. Alcohol becomes a test of selfhood. Can you master it, or does it master you? This framing is seductive and dangerous. It obscures structural factors: availability, stress, inequality, trauma. But it's intuitive. It fits the moral language people already have. A scholarly debate challenges this framing sharply. Some argue addiction should be understood as a disease of reward systems, shaped by environment as much as choice. Others caution against removing agency entirely. In your time, neither framework exists. What exists is observation, pattern, consequence. You see that dependence is not evenly distributed. Those with fewer responsibilities drink more freely, and sometimes fall harder. Those under constant pressure drink for relief, and sometimes can't stop. Alcohol finds the cracks in people's lives and widens them. Trauma matters, loss, violence, displacement. Alcohol doesn't cause these things, but it offers temporary escape. Some people return from that escape, some stay. You watch someone who was once central to the group drift toward the edges. They're still present, but less reliable, less trusted. The drink that once bound them to others now separates them. This reversal is painful to witness. Alcohol giveth, alcohol taketh away. Care exists, but it's inconsistent. Without understanding neurochemistry, without treatment models, responses rely on willpower, ritual cleansing, spiritual intervention. Sometimes these help, often they don't. Relapse is common. The group grows weary. This weariness shapes norms. Tolerance for excess drops. Rules tighten. This in turn drives some behaviour underground. People drink alone. Stronger drinks appear. Secrecy replaces supervision. Harm shifts shape. A scholarly debate notes this pattern repeating across history. Stricter regulation reduces visible addiction but increases hidden forms. Relaxation reduces secrecy but increases public harm. There is no stable equilibrium. Every solution creates new problems. You notice alcohol being blamed for things it didn't cause. Laziness, violence, moral decay. This scapegoating simplifies complex issues. It also fuels calls for abstinence movements. Small at first, localized, often spiritual. Some people reject intoxication entirely, framing sobriety as purity or clarity. These movements gain followers, then lose them. The pull of intoxication remains strong. Here's a quirky historical detail. Some early abstinence traditions don't ban alcohol outright, but ban drunkenness, emphasizing control over elimination. This distinction matters. It acknowledges alcohol's utility while condemning loss of agency. You can see why this compromise appeals. Children growing up in this environment learn contradictory lessons. Alcohol is normal, alcohol is dangerous, alcohol is medicine, alcohol is shame. Navigating these mixed messages becomes part of maturation. Some manage it, some don't. You begin to understand that addiction is not a separate phenomenon from intoxication. It's a possibility inherent in it, a risk carried quietly alongside every benefit. This realization doesn't stop people from drinking, but it does change how they talk about it. Compassion grows slowly, not universal, not enlightened, but present. Some elders speak differently now, less condemnation, more concern. They remember friends lost, patterns repeated, memory softens judgment. There's a fringe theory that societies with long histories of intoxication gradually develop cultural antibodies, rituals, norms, stories that reduce addiction rates over generations. Critics argue there's no clear evidence. Supporters point to stable drinking cultures with low harm. You can feel the beginnings of such adaptation, even if outcomes remain uncertain. Alcohol continues to spread through trade, through conquest, through imitation. Along the way, it carries both joy and dependency. No culture escapes this duality. Those that pretend otherwise pay a different price. You sit beside someone who hasn't had a drink in days. Not by rule, by effort. You see the strain. You also see the pride. Both are real. You offer food, water, presence. Sometimes that's all that can be done. You understand now that the first humans who got drunk and high didn't just discover pleasure. They discovered vulnerability. They discovered that altering the mind could heal, bind, inspire, and trap. And every society since has been trying, imperfectly, to keep the gifts without falling into the pit they open beneath them. You look at the cup in your hand, now heavy with implication. You don't put it down forever. You don't lift it thoughtlessly either. You hold it, aware that within it lives one of humanity's oldest bargains, relief in exchange for risk, connection in exchange for loss of control, a bargain no one has ever fully escaped, and one no one has ever completely refused. The substances start travelling farther than you do. That's the realization that creeps up as unfamiliar tastes appear. Resins you didn't harvest, drinks made from plants you've never seen growing nearby. Someone brings them from beyond the hills. Someone else trades for them, offering grain, tools, stories. Intoxication becomes portable, and portability changes everything. Trade routes form for many reasons: salt, stone, survival. But intoxicants slide into them effortlessly. They're lightweight, desirable, memorable. A sip can mark an encounter more strongly than a handshake ever could. This is a historical fact archaeologists recognise clearly. Psychoactive substances are among the earliest widely traded goods, appearing far from their natural sources astonishingly early. Alcohol adapts especially well to travel. Wine keeps. Beer evolves methods of preservation. Concentrated forms appear. Each innovation extends reach. Where the drink goes, practices follow. Songs, rituals, rules. Intoxication becomes cultural cargo. Here's a quirky detail scholars love pointing out. Many early trade goods were valued not for everyday use, but for ceremonial moments. Intoxicants fit this perfectly. You don't need them daily to crave them deeply. Scarcity enhances prestige. A drink from far away carries the weight of distance itself. You feel that weight when a visitor pours something unfamiliar. The taste is strange, the effect slightly different. People watch closely, how you react, how much you take. Intoxication becomes diplomacy. Handle it well, and the exchange feels respectful. Handle it poorly, and embarrassment travels faster than the drink ever could. A scholarly debate runs parallel to this spread. Did intoxicants drive trade networks, or did trade networks simply carry them along? Some argue demand for rare intoxicants incentivized long-distance exchange. Others argue they were just another commodity riding existing routes. Standing here, watching attention sharpen the moment a foreign drink appears, it's hard to believe demand played no role. Drugs travel too. Resins compressed for transport, dried leaves, seeds. Knowledge travels alongside them. How much to take, how to prepare, when to avoid. Sometimes that knowledge is incomplete. Harm follows. The receiving culture learns the hard way. You notice that unfamiliar substances often carry mystique. They're associated with distant lands, powerful spirits, exotic practices. This amplifies their effect psychologically. Expectation shapes experience. Modern neuroscience confirms this placebo amplification, but you feel it intuitively. What comes from far away feels potent. Trade doesn't just move substances, it moves norms. A group accustomed to restrained drinking encounters one that celebrates excess. Tension follows. Who is right? Whose rules apply? Alcohol becomes a site of cultural clash. Sometimes compromise emerges, sometimes conflict, sometimes imitation without understanding leads to disaster. A scholarly debate examines whether intoxicants contributed to cultural homogenization or diversification. Some argue shared substances created shared rituals, smoothing differences. Others argue local adaptations multiplied, producing distinct drinking cultures. Evidence suggests both. Intoxication spreads, but it never spreads unchanged. You also notice power shifting along these routes. Those who control access to foreign intoxicants gain influence. They become gatekeepers of novelty. This is an early form of soft power. No armies needed, just scarcity and desire. There's a darker side too. Some groups become known primarily for their intoxicants. Their identity reduces to what they export. This specialization makes them valuable and vulnerable. When trade is disrupted, livelihoods collapse. Dependence on intoxicant economies forms early. A fringe theory debated among historians suggests that early drug trade laid groundwork for later exploitative systems: colonialism, monoculture, coercive labour. Critics argue this projects modern dynamics backward. Supporters counter that patterns of dependence and extraction appear surprisingly early. You don't see empires yet, but you can feel a symmetry forming. Alcohol and drugs also carry disease-along routes, not just physical illness but behavioural contagion. Drinking styles spread. Binge patterns appear where moderation once ruled. Elders complain. Youth imitate outsiders. Cultural immune systems struggle to adapt. You notice regulation lagging behind spread. Rules that worked locally don't translate well. A drink that's weak at home is strong elsewhere. A ritual that contained excess breaks without shared meaning. Harm spikes in border zones. Places where substances arrive without context. This fuels suspicion. Outsiders are blamed. Their drinks labelled dangerous, corrupting. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. The fear is real regardless. Alcohol becomes entangled with xenophobia. What you drink becomes a statement about who you trust. A scholarly debate asks whether intoxicants historically intensified conflict between groups. Some argue shared drinking facilitated diplomacy. Others argue unfamiliar substances destabilized encounters. Both outcomes are documented. Intoxication is a wild card in negotiation, capable of bonding or disaster. You see alliances sealed over cups. You also see misunderstandings spiral after someone drinks too much, misreads a gesture, oversteps. Alcohol magnifies intention and misinterpretation alike. When language barriers exist, that amplification is risky. Knowledge transfer improves outcomes. Groups begin teaching visitors how to drink their drinks. Dosage, timing. This hospitality reduces harm. It also spreads influence. Teaching someone how to get drunk properly is a surprisingly effective way to build rapport. You realise that intoxicants function as a kind of cultural technology. They require instruction. They work best with shared expectations. Without that, they fail. Trade accelerates this lesson. Other substances move differently. Psychedelics remain more localised, tied to specific ecologies. Their spread is slower, more guarded. Alcohol, by contrast, is democratic. Anywhere sugar exists, it can be made. Trade doesn't just move alcohol, it inspires local production. Recipes adapt, hybrids emerge. This adaptability makes alcohol uniquely global. It doesn't remain foreign for long, it naturalizes itself. Within a generation, it feels local. That's powerful. It means intoxication becomes a shared human experience across cultures, even as meanings diverge. A scholarly debate considers whether this shared chemical experience contributed to a sense of common humanity. Critics scoff. Chemistry doesn't create empathy. Supporters point to how often drinking rituals emphasize brotherhood, peace, kinship. You've seen strangers soften after sharing a cup. It doesn't erase difference, but it creates a bridge. Trade also introduces competition. Whose drink is better, stronger, more refined? Prestige attaches. Regions develop reputations. Pride follows. Intoxication becomes a point of cultural identity, something to defend, improve, boast about. Innovation accelerates. New vessels, new techniques, new blends. Competition drives refinement. Alcohol evolves rapidly in trade-rich zones. This innovation then feeds back into social complexity. Specialists, guilds, reputations. You notice that as substances travel, stories travel faster. Tales of miraculous drinks, of dangerous highs, of places where people drink like gods or die like fools. These stories shape expectation before contact. Sometimes they're true, often they're exaggerated. Either way, they prime behaviour. A fringe idea among scholars suggests that anticipation created by trade narratives may have intensified intoxication experiences themselves. Expectation plus chemistry equals stronger effect. Modern placebo research supports this. You've felt it. The drink hits harder when you believe it should. Trade routes also become routes of regulation. Ideas about moderation, taboo, ritual travel alongside substances. Some groups adopt foreign rules wholesale, others reject them violently. This negotiation shapes emerging legal and moral systems. You see one group ban an imported drink after a disastrous festival. Another embraces it and builds new rituals around it. Outcomes diverge. There is no universal lesson, only adaptation. Over time, intoxicants help stitch distant regions into shared histories. A drink links you to places you'll never see. A resin ties you to a forest beyond your horizon. This connectivity expands imagination. The world feels larger and closer. You understand now that the story of humans getting drunk and high is not local. It's migratory. It moves with feet, with caravans, with boats. It crosses boundaries long before borders exist, and every time it arrives somewhere new, it repeats the same pattern. Fascination, experimentation, harm, adaptation, embedding. Some societies manage it well, others stumble, none are untouched. You accept a cup from a visitor whose language you barely understand. You drink carefully. They watch your face. You watch theirs. A smile spreads, tentative, then genuine. In that moment, intoxication is translation, imperfect, risky, powerful. A shared altered state bridging distance that words cannot. You know it won't always go this smoothly. You've seen enough to understand the danger, but you also know why people keep doing it. Because in a world growing larger by the day, humans reach for any tool that makes strangers feel a little less strange. And alcohol, portable, familiar, endlessly adaptable, has learned how to do exactly that. The complaints start sounding familiar. You hear them from elders leaning on worn tools, from leaders frustrated by disorder, from parents watching their children change too fast. The words differ, but the shape is the same. Things weren't like this before. The drink is stronger. The youth are reckless. Respect is thinning. Intoxication becomes the symbol onto which all unease is projected. This is moral panic, ancient and recurring. A historical fact scholars find almost amusing in its consistency is that every society with records complains about the next generation's drinking. Sumerian texts grumble about tavern culture. Greek philosophers warn about wine softening virtue. Roman writers lament decadence. The pattern predates writing, and you can feel it forming now, long before anyone scratches it into clay. Alcohol becomes the scapegoat because it's visible, loud, emotional. It's easier to blame than hunger, inequality, rapid change, or fear of loss of control. Intoxication doesn't cause these anxieties, but it gives them a face. You notice how criticism sharpens when society is already stressed. Bad harvests, crowded settlements, new trade routes, outsiders arriving. In these moments, intoxication feels dangerous not because it changed, but because the world did. Alcohol amplifies whatever pressure is already present. A scholarly debate circles this endlessly. Do moral panics around intoxication reflect real increases in harm, or are they exaggerated responses to social change? Evidence suggests both. Sometimes consumption really does spike. Sometimes behaviour shifts because norms are eroding, and sometimes elders simply don't recognise the world they helped create. You watch rules tighten again. Tavern hours restricted, festival drinking shortened, certain brews banned outright. These measures are framed as protection of youth, of morality, of productivity. They sometimes work, often they don't. Prohibition sparks creativity. People drink in secret. They brew faster, stronger drinks. They move gatherings out of sight. Harm doesn't disappear, it relocates. This is another historical constant scholars note with weary familiarity. Wherever intoxication is deeply embedded, outright bans tend to backfire. You see hypocrisy too. Those calling loudest for restraint often drink privately. Their excess is excused as stress, leadership burden, tradition. Public drunkenness is condemned. Private intoxication flourishes. The double standard breeds resentment. A scholarly debate digs into this pattern. Are moral panics genuinely about harm reduction, or about reasserting authority? Critics argue leaders fear losing control more than they fear intoxication itself. Supporters argue someone has to draw lines. From where you stand, the motives are mixed. Fear and care rarely separate cleanly. Youth respond predictably. They drink to defy, to test limits, to claim adulthood faster than permission allows. Alcohol becomes a rite of rebellion. This is not new. It feels eternal because it is. Elders respond with nostalgia. They remember their own excesses as lighter, safer, more meaningful. Memory softens past mistakes. This selective recall fuels panic. We drank, they say, but not like this. The specifics don't matter. The sentiment does. You notice how language around intoxication hardens during these moments. Words like decay, corruption, poison appear. Alcohol is framed not as tool or medicine, but as invader. This rhetoric justifies harsher measures. It also heightens fascination. Forbidden things glow brighter. A quirky historical detail scholars enjoy pointing out is how often moral panics lead to exaggerated claims. Youth collapsing en masse, families ruined overnight, entire traditions at risk. The reality is usually messier and slower, but panic thrives on immediacy. It demands action now. You see cycles emerge. Restriction leads to backlash. Backlash leads to loosening. Loosening leads to excess. Excess leads back to restriction. Each generation believes it has finally found the right balance. Each is wrong in new ways. Alcohol sits at the center of this cycle, not because it's uniquely evil, but because it's uniquely adaptable. It slips through cracks. It changes form. It survives scrutiny by evolving. Drugs beyond alcohol fuel panic too. New substances arrive via trade. Their effects are unfamiliar. Doses misjudged. Deaths occur. Panic spikes. Elders lump all intoxicants together. Alcohol, once familiar, becomes guilty by association. The category of getting high expands ominously. A scholarly debate asks whether moral panics actually increase harm by pushing experimentation underground. Modern evidence suggests they often do. You see the beginnings of that here. Secret use lacks guidance. Overdose risk rises. Panic creates the very danger it fears. Still, some good comes from alarm. Discussions happen. Data, however crude, accumulates. People start counting injuries, remembering patterns. This proto-epidemiology isn't systematic, but it's something. Awareness grows. Communities begin distinguishing between substances more carefully. Alcohol is tolerated. Certain drugs are restricted. Others are ritualized tightly. Blanket condemnation gives way to nuance, slowly, grudgingly. Panic burns hot, but adaptation follows. You notice storytellers shifting tone. Drunk heroes become cautionary figures. Songs include warnings. Humour sharpens. Laughter still exists, but it carries an edge. Cultural narratives adjust to signal risk without eliminating desire. A fringe theory debated among anthropologists suggests that repeated moral panics around intoxication may have driven the development of ethical discourse itself, forcing societies to articulate values around control, pleasure, responsibility. Critics argue ethics arise from many pressures. Supporters point to how often intoxication features in moral teaching. You can feel the pressure pushing thought toward abstraction. What is moderation? What is excess? Who decides? These questions don't have stable answers. They change with population size, resource availability, power distribution. Alcohol simply forces them into the open. You also notice that panic tends to target visible intoxication more than harmful patterns. Loud festivals draw criticism. Quiet dependence escapes notice. This misalignment frustrates those paying attention. But visibility drives politics. What can be seen can be condemned. Some groups attempt radical solutions. Abstinence movements grow, rooted in purity or discipline. They attract those tired of chaos. They offer clarity, belonging, but they struggle to spread widely. Alcohol's utility and pleasure undercut total rejection. A scholarly debate tracks these movements across history. Why do abstinence cultures rarely dominate for long? Some argue they demand too much restraint. Others argue they fail to accommodate human desire. From inside, the problem feels simpler. Saying never is harder than saying sometimes. You see compromise solutions emerge. Dilution, low alcohol drinks, age limits, ritual-only access. These measures aim to keep intoxication while reducing harm. Their success varies. They require enforcement, trust, shared values. Trust is fragile during panic. Outsiders are blamed, merchants accused, brewers watched. Alcohol becomes entangled with economic resentment. Those profiting from drink are suspect, sometimes rightly, sometimes not. Scapegoating escalates. A historical fact scholars note grimly is that moral panics around intoxication often coincide with broader crackdowns on behaviour, on dissent, on marginalised groups. Alcohol becomes one excuse among many. Control expands. You feel the tightening net. Conversations lower. Jokes become careful. Drinking continues, but with tension. Pleasure mixed with defiance. This changes the experience itself. Intoxication under scrutiny feels different. Less free, more charged. Yet panic never fully wins. Because despite fear, people remember why they drink. Not just for excess, but for bonding, for relief, for ritual, for the simple human desire to feel differently sometimes. Eventually panic exhausts itself. New norms settle. A new balance, temporary, imperfect, emerges. The elders who panicked age out. The youth they feared become the new elders, carrying softened memories of their own rebellion. The cycle prepares to repeat. You sit listening to another complaint about kids these days and their drinking. You recognise the rhythm. You've heard it before. You'll hear it again. Alcohol didn't change. Society did. And intoxication, as always, became the lightning rod for that change. You understand now that moral panic is less about substances than about uncertainty, about speed, about loss of familiar boundaries. Alcohol just happens to be excellent at exposing those fears. You finish your drink quietly, neither defiant nor ashamed. You've seen enough cycles to know that this moment, this panic, will pass. What won't pass is humanity's complicated relationship with altered states. Fear rises, control tightens, desire adapts. And somewhere beneath the noise, people keep getting drunk and high, not because they're reckless, but because they're human, navigating a world that keeps changing faster than certainty can keep up. You start noticing the patterns inside your own head. Not metaphorically, literally. The way anticipation hits before the drink ever touches your lips. The way a familiar smell sparks warmth before chemistry has time to act. The way disappointment arrives when the cup is empty, even if you're no longer intoxicated. Something deeper than culture is at work here. Your brain is learning. This is a historical truth modern science has confirmed, but ancient humans lived without naming. Intoxicants hijack reward systems that evolved for survival. Dopamine doesn't care whether pleasure comes from ripe fruit, social approval, or alcohol. It fires for prediction and reward, and alcohol is very good at both. You feel it when the drink is being poured, when the ritual begins, when the first sip lands. Each step releases its own pulse of satisfaction. This layered anticipation explains why intoxication becomes so compelling even when the effects themselves are no longer surprising. Scholars debate how much this neurobiology shaped human behaviour versus merely responding to it. Some argue our brains were primed to love intoxication because it mimicked signals of abundance and safety, sweetness, calories, social bonding. Others argue alcohol exploited a system never meant for it. The distinction matters less than the outcome. Once discovered, altered states plug directly into motivation. You begin to understand why intoxication spreads so persistently across cultures. It's not just learned behaviour, it's reinforced behaviour. Every time alcohol reduces fear, eases pain, or enhances connection, the brain takes note. Memory tags the experience as valuable. This creates feedback loops. Drink to celebrate. Celebration feels better. Drink to grieve. Grief softens. Drink to negotiate. Tension lowers. The brain learns that alcohol is useful in many emotional contexts. That versatility makes it dangerous and indispensable. Here's a quirky neuroscientific detail modern researchers find fascinating. Alcohol reduces activity in the brain's threat detection systems while enhancing social reward processing. In plain terms, it makes danger feel smaller and people feel nicer. For a social species under constant stress, that combination is powerful. You feel it working when a confrontation dissolves into laughter, when anxiety loosens, when the future feels less sharp. These effects are temporary, but memory doesn't care. It remembers relief. A scholarly debate asks whether humans evolved alongside intoxicants in a way that shaped brain chemistry itself. Some argue populations with long histories of fermentation developed genetic variations affecting alcohol metabolism. Others argue culture adapted faster than biology ever could. Evidence suggests both occurred. Certain groups process alcohol differently, but desire remains universal. Your brain also learns tolerance. The same amount no longer hits as hard. Dopamine response dulls. You drink more to reach the same effect. This is not moral failure, it's adaptation. The brain seeks balance. Alcohol pushes. The brain compensates. This adaptation fuels escalation and frustration. The joy that once arrived easily now requires effort. Some people chase it harder. Others accept diminishing returns. This divergence shapes social roles. The heavy drinker, the moderate, the abstainer. Brain chemistry intersects with personality and circumstance. Stress amplifies everything. Periods of scarcity, conflict, or uncertainty increase intoxication's appeal. Alcohol offers immediate relief when long-term solutions are unavailable. Modern research confirms stress increases vulnerability to addiction. Ancient humans didn't know the mechanism, but they knew the pattern. Hard times meant heavier drinking. A scholarly debate circles whether intoxication served as a psychological survival tool during prolonged stress. Some argue it helped humans endure otherwise unbearable conditions. Others argue it worsened outcomes by masking problems. Both are true at different scales. Alcohol helps individuals cope. It can hurt societies if relied on too heavily. You feel this tension personally. After long days of labour, the drink feels earned, necessary. It restores enough calm to sleep, to rise again. Without it, exhaustion compounds. With it, tomorrow feels possible. But you also see mornings made worse by excess. Injuries, missed opportunities. The brain learns both lessons, but not equally. Relief is immediate. Consequence is delayed. Biology favours the present. This imbalance is why rules and rituals matter. Culture steps in where brains are short-sighted. Timing, dosage, context. These external structures compensate for internal bias. Without them, intoxication runs wild. With them, it becomes manageable, sometimes. Here's a fringe idea debated among evolutionary psychologists. Humans may be uniquely prone to addiction because of our advanced imagination. We can anticipate pleasure vividly, relive it mentally and plan for it obsessively. Alcohol doesn't just feel good, it can be rehearsed in the mind endlessly. Other animals get drunk, humans get obsessed. You recognise that obsession when someone talks about the next festival weeks in advance, when planning revolves around supply. when the absence of drink occupies more mental space than its presence. The substance has moved from experience to expectation. Brains differ. Some people are more sensitive to reward, more impulsive, more reactive to stress. These differences existed long before alcohol, but alcohol reveals them starkly. This fuels moral confusion. Why can some handle it and others can't? Without neuroscience, explanations turn personal. Character, will, fate. A scholarly debate challenges this personalization. Modern evidence shows genetic and developmental factors strongly influence addiction risk. Ancient societies couldn't test genes, but they noticed patterns in families. Some lineages drank heavily generation after generation. This observation fed superstition, stigma, and cautionary tales. You see families restrict access internally. Not for you. These decisions aren't fair. They're protective. Alcohol forces families to confront uncomfortable truths about difference. Your own relationship with intoxication shifts as awareness grows. You notice cravings forming. You also notice satisfaction arriving before intoxication itself. This awareness doesn't remove desire, but it changes how you interpret it. The urge feels mechanical, not magical. Some scholars argue this metacognition, thinking about thinking, may have been sharpened by intoxication itself. Altered states make internal processes more visible. Critics argue introspection exists without drugs, but alcohol, by exaggerating emotion and reward, makes mental patterns harder to ignore. You also notice how the brain links alcohol with cues: the fire, the cup, the song that always plays before drinking. These cues trigger desire automatically. This conditioning explains why rituals matter so much. Break the ritual, weaken the craving, reinforce it, strengthen the loop. This insight emerges slowly, empirically. Some groups change vessels deliberately, others change songs, others shift timing. These tweaks aren't symbolic, they're practical. They disrupt expectation, they reduce harm, culture hacking brain chemistry without knowing the words. A scholarly debate explores whether such cultural adaptations qualify as early behavioral science. Critics argue that's anachronistic. Supporters argue intent matters less than effect. Humans were experimenting on themselves long before they wrote theories about it. You see success and failure. Some tweaks help, others backfire. There is no universal fix. Brains differ, context differs. Alcohol remains potent. Other substances interact with the brain differently. Psychedelics disrupt default patterns rather than reinforcing them. They don't produce the same craving loops. This difference becomes apparent over time. Alcohol creates habit. Psychedelics create memory. Both alter consciousness, but they leave different footprints. This distinction fuels ongoing debates about which substances are more dangerous. Alcohol harms bodies and habits. Psychedelics can destabilize perception. Societies weigh these risks differently. The brain's response informs the judgment, even if implicitly. You realize now that the story of humans getting drunk and high is also the story of humans discovering their own neural machinery, by accident, through sensation, long before scanners or diagrams. You learned what anticipation feels like, what tolerance feels like, what craving feels like. You learned that relief can be trained into the brain, and so can suffering. This knowledge doesn't arrive as clarity. It arrives as pattern recognition, as stories told, as rules formed, as warnings repeated. Some people begin speaking about balance in new ways, not moral balance, but internal balance, feeling right without excess. These ideas are fragile, easily drowned by festival noise, but they persist. A fringe theory suggests that this growing awareness of internal regulation contributed to philosophical thought later. Ideas about moderation, virtue, self-mastery. Critics argue philosophy has many roots. Supporters point out how often early philosophy obsesses over pleasure and restraint. Alcohol may have forced the question. You sit quietly after drinking, noticing the rise and fall of feeling. You notice the urge to continue. You also notice that it passes. This observation is small but powerful. It introduces choice where habit once ruled. Not everyone makes this observation. Not everyone can act on it. But the possibility exists. Alcohol taught you that the mind can be altered. Now it's teaching you that the mind learns, and that what it learns can either serve you or trap you. That realization doesn't end intoxication. It complicates it. And complexity, once introduced, never fully disappears. You finish your cup with intention, not reflex. You feel the familiar warmth. You also feel the awareness watching it. For the first time, intoxication isn't just something happening to you. It's something you're observing from the inside. And that quiet shift, that inward glance, will echo far beyond this moment, into ethics, into philosophy, into every future attempt humans make to understand why they so desperately love changing their own minds. A question starts circulating that no one quite knows how to ask out loud. Not what does this do to us, but what if this is part of us? It surfaces in fragments, half jokes, half theories, stories told around the fire after drinking but remembered sober. Someone wonders aloud if humans think the way they do because of these altered moments. Someone else suggests that seeing the world differently, even briefly, might have changed how the world was understood permanently. This is where intoxication stops being a habit and starts becoming a hypothesis. Modern scholars call it provocative, sometimes reckless. The idea that getting high helped make us human, that altered states, whether through alcohol, psychedelics, fasting or trance, played a role in shaping consciousness itself. Critics dismiss it as romantic speculation. Supporters point to patterns that are hard to ignore. You feel those patterns in your own thinking. Language feels more flexible after intoxication. Metaphor comes easier. You compare unlike things without effort. Fire becomes alive. Time stretches and folds. Identity loosens. These cognitive shifts don't vanish entirely when sobriety returns. Some residue remains. A willingness to imagine differently. A historical fact that complicates dismissal of this idea is the timing. Symbolic behaviour, art, ritual, myth, emerges not long after evidence of widespread intoxication. Correlation is not causation, scholars warn, but correlation invites curiosity. Why now? Why so suddenly? One theory argues that altered states increased neural connectivity, encouraging novel associations. Another argues that intoxication merely revealed capacities that already existed. A third suggests social use mattered more than neurological effect, that shared altered states synchronized groups enabling collective imagination. The debate remains unresolved and likely always will. From inside the experience, the boundary between revelation and invention feels thin. You notice how children raised around intoxication don't fear altered states the way they might otherwise. They grow up knowing the mind is flexible. That reality itself shapes worldview. A rigid sense of reality is harder to maintain when you've watched adults shift states regularly and return intact. Here's a quirky neuroscientific detail that fuels modern debate. Psychedelic states often reduce activity in the brain's default mode network, the system associated with self-focus and habitual thought. Alcohol does this less cleanly, but it still loosens rigid patterns. Some researchers argue that temporary reduction in egocentric processing may have encouraged early humans to think beyond immediate self-interest, toward myth, group identity, even morality. Critics counter that cooperation existed long before drugs. True, but intoxication may have intensified it, made it emotionally salient enough to anchor stories and symbols. Feeling matters. What feels profound is remembered, taught, ritualized. You sense this when someone describes a vision not as personal fantasy, but as something we need to hear. The group listens, meaning becomes collective. Consciousness spills outward. A scholarly debate pushes further. Did altered states contribute to the emergence of theory of mind, the ability to imagine other minds? Some argue that experiencing one's own mind behaving unpredictably under intoxication could have made other minds seem less opaque, more imaginable. Critics argue this is speculative to the point of fiction. Still, the idea lingers. You remember moments of drunken empathy, feeling another's joy or pain more intensely than usual. Alcohol blurs boundaries. That blurring can be dangerous, but it can also be connective. It's easier to imagine being someone else when your own edges soften. Language adapts to capture these experiences. Words multiply for feelings, for states, for in-between sensations. Poetry emerges not as ornament, but as necessity. Ordinary speech can't hold what altered states reveal. Metaphor becomes cognitive technology. Art follows. Symbols compress experience into shareable form. A painted animal isn't just an animal, it's movement, fear, abundance, memory. Intoxication doesn't create art, but it charges it with urgency. A fringe theory debated among anthropologists suggests that repeated engagement with altered states may have trained humans to navigate ambiguity more comfortably. Critics argue ambiguity tolerance comes from social complexity alone. Supporters point to how altered states force confrontation with uncertainty, visions without clear meaning, sensations without names. You can feel how this might build cognitive flexibility. Religion absorbs these experiences quickly, not as doctrine at first, but as story. Spirits encountered in altered states become ancestors, gods, forces. Critics argue this pathologizes belief. Supporters argue belief systematizes experience. From inside, belief feels less like error and more like explanation, an attempt to stabilize the destabilizing. Alcohol plays a subtler role here than psychedelics. It doesn't shatter reality, it softens it. It makes transitions easier, between ordinary life and sacred moments, between fear and courage, between isolation and belonging. Some scholars argue alcohol functioned as a gateway drug not to harder substances but to spirituality itself. Others reject this as reductive. But the gateway metaphor sticks because alcohol is so often present at thresholds. You notice that societies with ritualized intoxication often develop rich cosmologies. Correlation again, cause unclear. But the pairing is persistent. There's also a counter-argument gaining traction among skeptics, that intoxication is overemphasized because it's dramatic, while quieter cognitive shifts, tool use, language complexity, child-rearing, did the real work. This is likely true. No single factor explains humanity. But intoxication may have been an accelerant, not a spark. You feel acceleration when a single night's experience reshapes months of thinking, when a vision reframes a loss, when drunken honesty resolves a long-standing conflict. These aren't everyday events, but they're impactful. A scholarly debate asks whether these impacts justify the risks. That's a moral question disguised as a scientific one. History shows humans consistently answer yes, at least some of the time. Risk is tolerated for meaning. You also notice how altered states democratize insight briefly. Anyone can stumble into a profound thought while drunk or high. Authority trembles. This is both liberating and destabilizing. Societies respond by structuring access, rituals, specialists, hierarchies, to contain insight without eliminating it. This containment shapes philosophy later. Who gets to speak truth? Under what conditions? With what preparation? Intoxication forces these questions early. A fringe idea suggests that the very concept of mind as something separable from body may have emerged from altered states, moments when perception changes so radically it feels externalized. Critics argue dualism arises from many sources. Supporters point to how often early metaphors describe mind as travel, possession, elevation. You've felt that sensation. It's persuasive. You begin to suspect that intoxication didn't just change what humans thought about, It changed how they knew that thinking could change. That meta-awareness, that consciousness is not fixed, is profound. It opens doors to experimentation, philosophy, ethics. It also opens doors to escapism and abuse. The same insight cuts both ways. You sit with the weight of that realization. Getting drunk and high wasn't just about pleasure, or coping, or bonding. It may have been about discovery of flexibility, of imagination, of the unsettling fact that reality is filtered through a mind that can be tuned, bent, reconfigured. That discovery doesn't end intoxication. It explains why humans keep returning to it, even after millennia of harm, because once you know the mind is changeable, curiosity doesn't let you forget. You lift your cup slowly, aware now that inside it might live one of humanity's most dangerous ideas, that the self is not fixed, that the world can be seen otherwise, and that seeing otherwise might be worth the risk. You drink, not to escape, not to rebel, but to touch, briefly, that ancient question again. What if getting drunk and high didn't just happen to humans? What if it helped make them human in the first place? Not every experiment ends in insight. That's the part most stories leave out. The bodies, the accidents, the nights that don't turn into wisdom or bonding or myth, but simply stop. You've seen enough now to know that for every moment of revelation, there's another where intoxication goes wrong in ways no ritual can soften. Someone drinks too much and falls into water they know well sober. Someone eats the wrong plant, misidentified in fading light. Someone combines substances without understanding how they stack. These aren't rare events. They're background noise in a long experiment conducted without instructions. Here's a historical fact archaeologists and historians acknowledge quietly. Many early deaths were almost certainly caused by intoxication, even if we can't always identify them as such in the record. Poisoning, drowning, falls, violence, alcohol and drugs amplify risk in all of these. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The danger was real. You feel that danger most clearly when laughter cuts off too suddenly, when a body doesn't wake, when vomiting doesn't stop, when panic spreads because no one knows what to do next. There is no emergency medicine, no antidote, only guesswork and hope. Sometimes hope works, sometimes it doesn't. A scholarly debate wrestles with how visible these failures were in shaping behaviour. Some argue early humans quickly learned to avoid lethal substances and doses, making fatal outcomes rare. Others argue that mortality was high enough to act as a constant corrective pressure. From inside the moment it feels less tidy. Knowledge spreads unevenly. Mistakes repeat. Children see the consequences. Bodies carried away. Silence where a voice used to be. These memories matter. They shape caution far more effectively than abstract rules ever could. Fear becomes part of cultural transmission. Alcohol plays a complex role here. It rarely kills outright, but it sets the stage. Slower reactions, poor judgment, overconfidence. Many accidents blamed on fate quietly begin with drink. This pattern becomes familiar. It's noticed, if not always admitted. Violence escalates too. Arguments that would fizzle sober turn physical. Weapons are picked up without full awareness. Regret follows quickly, if the person survives to feel it. Early societies are intimate. Everyone knows everyone. Violence under intoxication fractures trust deeply. A scholarly debate asks whether alcohol increased overall violence in early societies or merely concentrated it during certain events. Evidence suggests spikes around festivals and gatherings. Alcohol doesn't invent aggression, but it lowers thresholds. This makes timing predictable and dangerous. You see groups respond by adding layers of control. Weapons set aside during feasts. Certain people designated to remain sober. These measures aren't moral, they're practical. They save lives. Still, not all harm is dramatic. Chronic intoxication erodes health slowly. Liver damage, malnutrition, weakened immunity. Modern diagnoses for ancient suffering. People age faster, heal slower, die younger. These effects are subtle, easy to ignore until patterns emerge. A fringe theory debated among bioarchaeologists suggests that some skeletal markers of stress and disease may correlate with early alcohol-heavy societies. Critics argue correlation is weak and confounded by other factors like diet and labour. Supporters say the signal is there, just hard to isolate. You don't see bones yet. You see tired faces. Pregnancy complicates things further. Alcohol affects the unborn. This is a modern medical fact, but its effects would have existed then too. Miscarriages, developmental issues, stillbirths. These tragedies are often blamed on spirits, fate, or moral failure. The role of drink is rarely isolated, but it's there. Some cultures notice patterns. Pregnant women abstain, others don't. Outcomes differ. Knowledge accumulates painfully, generation by generation. This is one reason taboos around drinking during pregnancy appear early, and persist strongly where they do. Experience teaches faster than theory. Drugs beyond alcohol carry sharper risks. Dosage misjudgment leads to overdose. Hallucinations lead people into dangerous terrain. Not everyone guided through altered states is guided back safely. Shamans fail sometimes. The cost is human life. A scholarly debate centres on whether these failures limited the spread of certain substances. Psychedelics remain localised partly because of danger. Alcohol spreads because it's forgiving. It rarely kills directly. It teaches lessons slowly enough to be survivable, most of the time. You see grief handled differently when intoxication is involved. Anger mixes with guilt. We shouldn't have let them drink. They should have known better. Responsibility is diffuse. This ambiguity haunts groups. It drives stricter rules or deeper denial. Some deaths become cautionary myths, names remembered as warnings, stories retold with emphasis on the mistake. These narratives serve a function. They encode safety lessons emotionally. Fear sticks better than instruction. Others fade quietly. A drink too many on an ordinary night. No lesson extracted, just absence. These are harder. They don't justify new rules. They just hurt. A scholarly debate asks whether ancient societies were more accepting of death, making intoxication-related loss less impactful. That's a comforting myth. Loss hurts regardless of era. What differs is response, without. Systems to investigate or prevent, grief has fewer outlets. You also notice survivorship bias shaping culture. The practices that persist are those that don't kill too many people. Deadly substances drop out of use. Safer ones remain. Over time, this natural selection filters intoxicants themselves. Alcohol's dominance is partly explained by this grim math. Yet even safer substances exact tolls. Dependence, accidents, violence, none disappear. They're managed, not eliminated. This management becomes cultural expertise. You feel that expertise when someone pulls a cup away at the right moment, when a gathering ends earlier than planned, when a substance is withheld because the mood is wrong. These small interventions save lives quietly. A fringe idea among anthropologists suggests that early harm management around intoxication may have contributed to the development of communal responsibility norms, looking out for each other, intervening, sharing blame. Critics argue these norms existed anyway. Supporters point to how intoxication creates situations where intervention is necessary. You've felt that necessity. There's also a psychological cost to repeated accidents. Anxiety grows. People hesitate. Joy dims. Excessive fear can sterilize culture as much as excess intoxication can destroy it. Societies swing between these poles, trying to remember how to celebrate without dying. You sit after a bad night, sober and shaken. The fire burns low. No one jokes. The drink tastes different now. Not sweet, not comforting, but heavy with memory. This feeling matters. It tempers desire. It shapes future behaviour, not permanently. Time dulls fear. Pleasure returns, but the imprint remains. This is the shadow side of humanity's oldest experiments with the mind. For every insight gained, a price was paid, often by those least prepared to pay it. You understand now why intoxication demanded rules, rituals, specialists, taboos. Not because humans are weak, but because the margin for error is thin when you start playing with consciousness. The story of humans getting drunk and high isn't a clean arc of progress. It's jagged. Brilliant moments punctuated by tragedy. Learning written in scars as much as songs. You hold that truth alongside all the others. Pleasure and danger, connection and loss, discovery and death. And you realise that the real lesson early humans learned wasn't how to get drunk or high. It was how to survive doing so. Most of the time. At some point the reason changes. Not all at once, not announced, but subtly. Like a shift in posture you don't notice until your back aches differently. Intoxication was once something you reached for because it helped you do things. Bond, heal, endure, understand. Now, increasingly, it's something you reach for to get away from things. The work is heavier, the days are longer, responsibilities stack instead of cycling away with the seasons. You stay in one place now, and staying means problems linger. Conflicts don't dissolve with distance. Loss doesn't get walked off. Memory piles up. Alcohol notices this before you do. You start seeing people drink not after accomplishment, but before rest. Not to mark an event, but to end a day. This is a quiet but significant shift. Intoxication moves from punctuation to background, from ritual to routine. Here's a historical fact that scholars identify once written sources appear, but that behaviour suggests much earlier. Daily drinking becomes common only when societies reach a certain level of stability and stress simultaneously. Enough surplus to sustain it, enough pressure to make relief desirable. You're living in the early version of that balance. The drink still binds people, but now it also numbs. It smooths over dissatisfaction rather than resolving it. This doesn't make it evil. It makes it efficient. Too efficient. A scholarly debate centres on this transition. Some argue intoxication shifted from tool to escape as societies grew unequal and rigid. Others argue humans always used intoxication to escape. Earlier societies simply had fewer things to escape from. Both views contain truth. But the change in frequency matters. Escape that's occasional refreshes. Escape that's constant erodes. You notice the difference in conversations. Stories once told to connect now trail off into repetition. Laughter comes faster, but fades quicker. People drink to feel less rather than more. This flattening of emotion is subtle but profound. A quirky detail modern historians point out is that languages begin to develop separate words for drinking with purpose versus drinking without it. Celebration versus drowning. Medicine versus excess. That linguistic split reflects lived experience. You feel it even if you don't name it. Sleep becomes tied to intoxication. People struggle to rest without it. Alcohol teaches the body a shortcut, one that works at first, then sabotages itself. Modern neuroscience confirms this cycle. Ancient bodies learned it empirically, night after night. This is where intoxication starts to reshape time. Evenings shrink, mornings blur. Life compresses into manageable segments. Work, drink, sleep, repeat. This rhythm is survivable, is also constricting. A scholarly debate asks whether this shift toward habitual intoxication reduced creativity and ritual intensity. Some argue routine drinking dulled the specialness of altered states. Others argue it freed ritual from necessity, allowing it to evolve separately. Evidence points both ways. What's clear is that something changed. You still have festivals, still have rituals, but the drink is no longer reserved for them. It's always there. Availability dulls reverence. Excess becomes easier. You notice elders growing quieter. They remember when intoxication felt like an event. Now it feels like maintenance. Their complaints aren't moral, They're nostalgic. Something meaningful slipped into something mundane. At the same time, new forms of escape emerge. Gambling-like games, endless storytelling, passive listening. Alcohol pairs well with all of them. It smooths boredom. It makes repetition tolerable. This is not survival necessity. This is coping. A fringe idea debated among historians suggests that once intoxication becomes primarily escapist, societies begin producing distractions at scale, entertainment, spectacle, constant stimulation, to complement it. Critics argue distraction predates intoxication. Supporters note how often the two intertwine. You can feel the pairing forming. Alcohol becomes less about transformation and more about suspension, suspending worry, suspensing ambition, pressing pause. This is comforting. It's also quietly limiting. Growth slows when pause becomes default. You see individuals retreat inward. They still gather, but they engage less deeply, drinking together without really being together. This is new. Intoxication without intimacy. It leaves a hollow aftertaste. Addiction thrives here. Escape feeds dependence more reliably than celebration ever did. When the goal is to avoid feeling, the threshold for enough keeps moving. This is where earlier lessons struggle to hold. Ritual boundaries blur. Rules feel arbitrary. Some respond by trying to resacralize intoxication, restricting it again, tying it back to meaning. Others lean harder into escape, dismissing concern as joyless. The split widens. A scholarly debate frames this as a turning point in the human relationship with pleasure. Did intoxication shift from enhancing life to replacing it? That framing is dramatic, but not entirely wrong. When relief becomes the main goal, pleasure thins out. You don't abandon intoxication. You just start using it differently. And usage shapes outcome. Children growing up now see drinking as background noise. Less special, less instructive. They learn habits faster than meaning. This worries some elders deeply. They try to reintroduce story, caution, ritual. Sometimes it works. Often it competes poorly with convenience. You feel the weight of this change personally. There are nights you drink not because it's time, but because you don't want to sit with yourself. The drink does its job. Silence fades. Thoughts soften. Tomorrow feels postponed. This postponement is seductive. A scholarly debate asks whether this kind of escapism is inherently harmful or simply human adaptation to complexity. Some argue it's a pressure valve that prevents breakdown. Others argue it masks the need for structural change. The argument persists because reality supplies examples for both. You notice that people who still use intoxication for purpose, ritual, bonding, insight, seem more grounded. Not happier all the time, but more connected. Those who use it primarily to avoid feel lighter in the moment and heavier over time. This observation spreads quietly. It doesn't become doctrine, it becomes preference. Some nights you choose not to drink, or to drink less. Not because of rules, but because you want the feeling to mean something again. That choice is fragile. Stress erodes it. But the idea exists now, that intoxication can be intentional or evasive, and that the difference matters. Alcohol didn't force this shift. Life did. As societies grew denser, more layered, more demanding, intoxication adapted to fill new psychological gaps. It always does. That adaptability is its strength, and its danger. You sit one evening and let the cup stay untouched longer than usual. You listen. The silence is uncomfortable at first, then informative. You feel tired, frustrated, restless. These feelings don't vanish. They sit with you. Eventually you drink, but you drink knowing why. That awareness doesn't solve the problem. It reframes it. The story of humans getting drunk and high isn't just about discovering substances. It's about discovering reasons and learning, slowly and imperfectly, that why you alter your mind may matter just as much as how you do it. You carry all of it forward. Every accident, every ritual, every rule, every excuse. None of it stays neatly in the past. It layers itself into habit, into expectation, into stories told so often they stop sounding like lessons and start sounding like facts about the world. By now, intoxication isn't something humans discovered anymore. It's something they inherit. You feel that inheritance in how natural it seems to reach for a drink when something matters, or when nothing does. The impulse no longer needs justification. It arrives pre-packaged with tradition, chemistry, memory, and myth. This is the long shadow of the first buzz. A historical fact becomes impossible to ignore. Once alcohol and other intoxicants are embedded in a culture, they rarely disappear. Religions ban them, states regulate them, moral movements denounce them, and yet they persist, adapting, resurfacing, rebranding. Archaeology shows gaps, periods of reduced use, but almost never erasure. Intoxication is resilient. You understand why now. It learned how to be useful in too many ways. It binds groups, it marks time, it dulls pain, it sharpens insight, it fuels trade, it reinforces power, it offers escape, it invites rebellion, it survives because it can play any role required of it. A scholarly debate asks whether this adaptability makes intoxicants uniquely human technologies, tools that operate as much on culture as on biology. Critics argue tools should be external. Supporters counter that language, art and ritual are internal technologies too. Alcohol sits comfortably among them, blurring boundaries. You notice how the stories about intoxication simplify over time. Nuance fades. People talk about it as good or bad, moral or corrupting, sacred or profane. These binaries are comforting. They're also false. The reality you've lived through is messier. Alcohol was never just one thing. You think about how future generations will misunderstand you, how they'll imagine early humans as naive, reckless, or magically wise. They'll miss the trial and error, the fear, the grief, the quiet competence developed through loss. A fringe theory among historians suggests that cultural memory compresses intoxication's role into mythic extremes because ordinary management isn't interesting to remember. No one sings songs about stopping at the right time, but survival depends on it. You see that pattern continuing. The stories that last are about ecstasy or ruin. The middle, the careful balance, is lived, not celebrated. Your own relationship with intoxication now feels weighted with all this history, even if you can't articulate it. When you drink, you're not just tasting fermented sugar, you're tasting a lineage of decisions made by countless humans before you, each trying to solve the same problems with the same imperfect tools. You feel both connected and constrained by that lineage. A scholarly debate looks toward the future and asks whether humans will ever outgrow intoxicants. Some argue technology will replace them, virtual escape without chemistry. Others argue nothing replaces the bodily immediacy of altered states. Based on everything you've seen, replacement seems unlikely. Adaptation is more plausible. New substances will appear, new rules will follow, new panics will erupt, new rituals will form. The cycle will continue because the underlying needs, connection, relief, meaning, aren't going anywhere. You think back to the first moments. Overripe fruit, honey water, smoke drifting upward. None of it felt historic at the time. It felt curious, accidental, human. That's how everything important starts. What's changed is scale. The first buzz altered a person. Now altered states shape civilizations. Alcohol sits at tables where treaties are signed. Drugs influence economies. Laws are written because of them. Wars are fought over them. All of that traces back to simple curiosity and a willingness to taste something strange. You feel a strange tenderness toward those first humans. Not foolish, not enlightened, just trying things in a dangerous world with limited information and endless imagination. They couldn't know the consequences any more than you can know yours, and yet, knowing what you know now, you don't judge them, because you still drink, you still seek altered states. whether through substances, music, stories, sleep, or silence. You still want the world to feel different sometimes. That desire didn't come from nowhere. It's ancient, it's learned, it's passed down like fire. The long shadow stretches into the present. Modern humans argue about intoxication with the same intensity, fear and hope as their ancestors. The language has changed. The stakes have scaled up. The core tension remains. How much should we alter ourselves? When does relief become avoidance? When does connection become control? These questions never resolve. They cycle, just like festivals and panics and hangovers. You sit with a drink in your hand, or maybe without one tonight, and feel the weight of history settle softly around you. Not oppressive, familiar. You realise now that the story of when humans first got drunk and high doesn't end anywhere in the past. It ends wherever a human pauses, looks at a substance that promises to change how they feel, and decides what they're really reaching for. Sometimes it's joy, sometimes it's rest, sometimes it's forgetting, sometimes it's meaning. The substance doesn't choose, you do. And that choice, repeated endlessly, imperfectly, across time, is what truly defines humanity's relationship with intoxication. You set the cup down, or lift it one last time for the night. Either way, you do it with awareness that would have been impossible before this long journey. Awareness of cost. Awareness of gift. Awareness that getting drunk and high was never just about losing control. It was about discovering, again and again, that the human mind is flexible, and that living with that knowledge is both the risk and the reward we've been negotiating ever since.